In a dark cell, we see a boy with white hair, his neck bound by chains and his hands shackled, until a woman appears before him. A young woman dressed in a beautiful suit with pink hair tells Aikido that the time for school has finally come. In another location, a group of people is gathered, apparently watching a fight. The bullies continue shouting and encouraging the nerds to advance in that battle. Some of them even start threatening the boys in the center, saying that if they didn't fight, they would die. One of the nerds, while showing he is completely nervous about it, wonders why he is doing something like this. The long-haired boy in front of him seems to give in to the threats he is facing, and because of that, he charges at his opponent in a completely careless manner. Even so, the long-haired boy manages to land a punch squarely on his enemy's face. This seems to satisfy and excite the bullies, who continue asking for more of that. Seeing that he was coming out on top, the long-haired nerd begins to beat up the poor chubby boy, who is only defending himself. The boy on the ground being beaten claims that it hurts, and in his mind, he questions how long this would last. After leaving his opponent completely immobilized, the long-haired boy stands up. Sitting nearby, watching all of this, a blonde who seems to be the organizer of the fight prepares to say something. He declares that the winner of the fight was the skinny nerd. The bullies who bet on him start celebrating while the others are furious for losing their money. As he turns around, the skinny boy seems happy to have succeeded. At that moment, the organizer and leader of those bullies stands up. He approaches the defeated chubby boy, who is receiving various cans of soda thrown in his direction. Bringing a piece of paper to the defeated nerd, the blonde states that the boy needed to get stronger. Then, to complete the humiliation, the poor chubby boy has a sheet that says "Loser of the Day" stuck to his chest. A little while later, we go to a school that is completely vandalized and full of bullies. One of the bullies attacks the chubby boy with a knee to his stomach. The boy, already in pain from the previous beating, starts to curl up. Another delinquent calls for the next person to hit that boy to come forward. A guy with bangs falling over his eye complains to Yuki because he had bet that he would win that fight, but the boy was beaten up. And to take revenge, he hits the nerd once more. Yuki falls to the ground, groaning in pain from all the blows he received. The bully organizing that beating session prepares for his turn. He charges at the poor nerd, who can only watch without being able to react. Once again, the boy is hit with a blow to his stomach. This is the last straw, causing the chubby boy to vomit. The delinquent celebrates while saying that he was the winner of the first contest to make Yuki vomit. At that moment, the guy with bangs continues to intimidate the four-eyed boy, stating that he has disappointed him many times and asking the young man to hand over his wallet. Hearing this, Yuki seems scared and hesitates for a moment. Seeing that, the guy with bangs gets even more irritated, saying that Yuki lost and therefore should take responsibility. At that moment, he rips the nerd's wallet away, and the nerd cannot do anything about it. As he sees the amount of money that boy had, the guy with bangs calls him pathetic. Even defeated, Yuki stands up, saying that was his money for lunch. However, that exhausts the delinquent's patience, who slams the boy's face against the ground with his foot. He continues to kick and beat the boy, ordering him to eat what he had vomited, as that way he wouldn't need money for food. Completely humiliated, Yuki thinks that he could no longer endure this life governed by violence. The boy questions why the hell he had to be beaten every day by those damn delinquents, and with his face rubbed against the ground, he remains irritated. Yuki begins to tell himself that he wishes someone could punish those guys, even if it were a villain or some crazy person. But at that moment, someone bursts through the classroom door, running quickly. The guy with bangs, who is hitting Yuki, turns around, questioning who had the audacity to do that. However, before the boy could think, the shadow of something looms over his face. At that moment, Akiga, who was previously imprisoned, enters the room, jumping and landing a flying kick right in the face of that delinquent. This causes the boy to fall backward, letting the money he had stolen from Yuki fly away. The poor nerd is scared, and the other bullies are too, upon seeing that scene. Akiga, like a maniac, doesn't stop, and even with the bully on the ground, he continues to beat him. After that, the blonde gets up with a smile on his face. The other delinquents, seeing Tanaka Aku completely beaten, shout calling for the boy. At that moment, upon hearing this, Aikido pulls out his phone and starts searching for the name of the bully he had just defeated. The ex-prisoner marks on his phone that he had caught Tanaka, who was apparently being sought after, but he complains because he only received 1 point for accomplishing this. Suzuki questions Aikido about who the hell he was. The blonde then turns to look at the boy while putting away his phone. With a smile, he reveals that he is Aikido, a transfer student, and says it's a pleasure to meet Suzuki. Seeing this confusing scene, Yuki seems to understand nothing. On the other hand, the boy in the red hoodie thinks that Aikido is mocking him, and so he goes to grab a chair. Then Suzuki throws the object at the blonde. Seeing this, the ex-prisoner seems startled. Yuki tries to warn him, however, no words can come out of his mouth. Even so, Aikido manages to dodge the object, demonstrating extreme agility. Seeing that he missed his target, the bully gets angry, but before he could think about it, his opponent appears behind him. In the happiest moment of his life, Aikido lands a kick right in the bully's groin. Because of this, the bully immediately spits saliva from the pain. This is enough to intimidate not only Yuki, but also the other allies of the boy in the red hoodie. After defeating another of his opponents, Aikido starts doing some calculations and realizes he has gained a good amount of points. Licking the blood of his opponents off his hand, the young man smiles. While doing this, he mentions that he wanted to know what the taste of delinquent crimes was like. Seeing Aikido charge once more against those bastards, Yuki wonders what was wrong with that transfer student. In a huge building in the center of a city, the same young woman who had released Aikido earlier tells some bosses that the project has been approved, and this could become their hope to significantly reduce the rise in juvenile crime. One of the suited men responds that this project is insane and there's no chance of such a ridiculous system existing. Another one agrees, questioning what management was thinking and what the superiors were doing. The woman responds that transferring juvenile delinquents to problematic schools could be useful because big people like them couldn't intervene directly. In this way, the convicts could solve the problems for them in exchange for reducing part of their sentence. Then at that moment, we see Aikido sitting on top of two unconscious students, and the boy is trying to take a picture with his phone. He then turns around asking Yuki to teach him how to do that. The nerd is confused and wonders if the delinquent was really calling him, and Aikido replies that he is. In his head, Yuki thinks that this guy was definitely someone he shouldn't get involved with, but the blonde had helped him before. Thus, the nerd teaches Aikido how to take a picture, and the blonde thanks him for the help. Akihito has an idea and says that since Yuki is there, he should also participate. At that moment, the delinquent grabs the nerd by the arm, pulling him closer. The blonde prepares to take a picture, and Yuki, while posing on top of one of the delinquents who had attacked him, states that it makes him feel good. Seeing the paper stuck to Yuki's back that said he was the punching bag of the day, Akihito gets confused. The convict questions why the nerd was wearing that, and the boy tries to explain that those people make you wear it when you lose in the fighting game. Upon hearing about that fighting game, the blonde seems very interested. Yuki reveals that the Mineta brothers from the 3rd year force weak students like him to fight so they can make money. Akihito starts to tremble, apparently feeling uncomfortable. Yuki, seeing this, questions if the boy also agreed that this was ridiculous. But in reality, Akihito reveals that it was incredible, thinking that if you bet on yourself and win the fight, you could earn a lot of money. Seeing this, Yuki becomes quite confused. After researching the Mineta brothers on the app he had, Akihito sees that one of them was Mineta Ryuji, the blonde we saw earlier, and the other was Mineta Ryugo. And both were worth a lot of points, so Yuki asks what kind of points he was talking about, and Aikido reveals that for every point you earn by defeating thugs, your sentence is reduced by 1 day, and upon hearing about the sentence, the chubby boy questions if Aikido was really serious. After receiving the answer that yes, Yuki becomes frightened. Then the delinquent reveals that he was a convicted criminal. Sometime later, we see Mineta Ryuji sitting in the same spot as before, holding a bat. The bullies who had been beaten up by Aikido arrive, apologizing for their delay. Seeing this, Mineta hits the guy in the red hoodie with his bat. He shouts that Suzuki was late and that he forbade and hated tardiness. However, the young man immediately receives something strange. The crazy guy questions Suzuki and his allies about what had happened to their faces. Suzuki then reveals that the transfer student was the one who did that to him, leaving Ryuji confused. The previously mentioned guy with bangs starts saying that that guy was incredibly strong and might even be stronger than Ryuji. This irritates Mineta, who hits his ally square in the face with the bat. The guy with bangs falls to his knees, spitting ketchup. As he bends down to get closer to his subordinates, the bully starts to say something. In an imposing manner, the blonde orders them to bring that transfer student right there. Yuki and Aikido arrive at a location, and the nerd explains that this is where the fights took place. Several bullies surround 2 nerds who are fighting. They all start encouraging the young men to show courage. After several blows, one of the nerds finally falls, defeated and exhausted. Ryuji goes to the center of the makeshift ring, raising the hand of the standing nerd and declaring him the winner. Mineta asks the curly-haired boy if he is okay, which ends up frightening him. The blonde states that the nerd's nose was broken and seemed to be hurting. At that moment, he brings his hand to the young man's face while saying he will fix his nose. With great aggression, Ryuji begins to press the broken nose of the poor nerd. While doing all this, the blonde continues to wear a malevolent smile on his face. Seeing this, all the other bullies start to laugh. Still maintaining a psychopathic expression, Ryuji says that now he was right. The poor curly-haired nerd begins to cry from the pain he is feeling and from seeing the ketchup dripping from his nose. In this way, the bullies start to mock the boy, and seeing this scene, Yuki becomes frightened and comments that they were going too far. While staring at his phone, Akihito realizes that this is one of the Mineta brothers. The delinquent realizes that defeating Ryuji would earn him a good amount of points. The bullies who were still laughing notice Akihito's presence and start to laugh even louder upon seeing that he was going to challenge Ryuji. Mineta begins to act mockingly, explaining to the transfer student that he was the strongest there and questioning whether he really wanted to do this knowing that information. Akihito calmly responds that he didn't care about that and that defeating Ryuji was as easy as defeating anyone else. Mineta, feeling disrespected, becomes very angry. At that moment, he grabs a metal bucket that was beside him. After that, he asks all the bullies present to bet their money on him and put it in the bucket. The young man also states that this would be a deadly fight that wouldn't end until one of them was dead, and without thinking, all the bullies bet on Ryuji. After the betting ends, Mineta looks at the transfer student and warns him that he will be the only one to die there. However, the protagonist seems unconcerned with the threat, merely staring at his enemy. Ryuji begins to put on his brass knuckles, then says that the collar Aikido was wearing was very interesting and that he would make him a pet. Aikido is shocked to see his opponent putting on brass knuckles. But before the blonde could think about it, one of the bullies who was the referee starts the fight. Before Aikido could even react, Ryuji charges at him. The bully tries to hit his opponent, who narrowly dodges backward. Watching that fight, one of the delinquents in the audience states that the transfer student was finished and his friend agrees, adding that he asked for it. Akihito, on the other hand, is still indignant, questioning whether weapons were really allowed. Ryuji responds that he never said weapons were prohibited, and in a deadly fight, there was only one rule. The fight would only end with one of them dead. At that moment, the blonde prepares to deliver a powerful blow to his enemy. With speed, he lands a punch squarely in Akihito's stomach. The ex-convict begins to spit blood from his mouth. Mineta continues his attacks and this time tries to hit Akihito with a knee strike, but the boy manages to dodge. All the spectators of that fight start to get more excited as they see Ryuji deliver those blows. The blonde once again tightens his brass knuckles as he prepares for another strike. He lands a powerful punch on Akihito's face, who doesn't even react. Due to the blow, a bit of blood starts to trickle down and drip onto the floor. Our protagonist looks at his hand, which was soaked with his own blood. Seeing that, Mineta starts to laugh. With the impact of the blow, Aikido kneels and all the bullies begin to celebrate that Ryuji had practically won the fight and mocked the transfer student. Yuki, watching this, feels scared and worried for his new ally. As cruel as he was, Mineta says it was too late for Aikido to give up, and that fight would only end with his death. One of the guys watching claims he feels sorry for the transfer student. Yuki thinks that Aikido was very reckless for wanting to fight one of the Mineta brothers. In this way, the arrogant one crouches down and while looking at his opponent in front of him, wonders how he should finish him off now. Ryuji says that Aikido cannot oppose him and die easily, and for that reason, he would torture the delinquent slowly until he killed him. However, suddenly a brick hits Mineta squarely on the forehead. The boy, seeing the blood running down his head, becomes extremely confused. But before he could process this, he is hit in the head again by another brick. Seeing that turn of events in the fight, Yuki is impressed. As he rises up majestically, Aikido shows no reaction, unlike Ryuji, who cries out in pain. Not laughing like a madman, our protagonist declares that he has found a beautiful stone. As he advances towards his fallen opponent, Aikido throws one of his bricks away. Mineta, completely frightened, asks his enemy what he was planning to do. Now holding the remaining brick with both hands and preparing to finish the fight, Akihito says that since weapons are allowed, he would use them. The defeated blonde even tries to ask his enemy to wait, but the madman just keeps a smile on his face. At that moment, a beating session begins, which even scares the bullies around. Without hesitation, Aikido continues hitting Mineta's face with his piece of stone, and during that beating, Ryuji begs for mercy several times. Yuki, witnessing that scene, becomes truly frightened. With his face completely deformed, Mineta declares that he gives up. Upon realizing that their leader had given up and that the transfer student had won, the delinquents are stunned. Even hearing this, the former convict responds that that was obviously not allowed. Mineta immediately asks why. Then with a psychopathic expression, Aikido replies that the fight would only end when one of them died. The three goons who had previously been beaten by the protagonist realize he is serious, and this makes all three freeze in fear. Ryuji goes into a panic, but before he can continue speaking, he is once again struck in the face. Everyone around realizes that the situation is getting out of control and tries to stop Aikido. One of them immobilizes the arms of the condemned, trying to make him stop. Watching that situation, Yuki asks Akihito to stop this. However, blinded by madness, the blonde does not listen and prepares to finish off his enemy. But now speaking louder, Yuki once again asks his new friend to stop this. Apparently, something happens before Aikido continues with his final blow. Upon hearing a voice calling him, Aikido really stops hitting his opponent. He looks to the side, realizing that all the bullies who had been laughing were now completely scared. Because of this, he realizes he has gone too far, asking Ryuji if the guy was okay with giving him the victory. The young man, completely injured, agrees, affirming that he has lost, so the transfer student drops the brick he had used as a weapon. As if nothing had happened, he walks towards Yuki, while telling his new friend that he has won. The nerd promptly agrees, but at that moment, Aikido places his bloodied hand on Yuki's shoulder. The four-eyed boy becomes extremely frightened when he sees the blood staining his white uniform. But without even caring about what he had done, Aikido suggests they go eat hamburgers since Yuki had promised to pay for him. The chubby boy agrees but still seems in shock from what he saw, but Aikido tells him not to worry about small things and then starts to drag him along. At that moment, the nerd looks back, seeing the bullies trying to help their leader, who was destroyed, and Yuki thinks that this had turned into something bad. Sometime later, we see the bullies still desperate, thinking that this was terrible and that they needed to call an ambulance quickly. But at that moment, the sound of a motorcycle makes everyone freeze and turn to see if what they heard was true. They all recognize the sound of that motorcycle, and at that moment, we see a young blonde man getting off his Harley Davidson. The muscular guy with a cigarette in his mouth walks towards the bully who had just been defeated, while the others call him Ryugo, brother of Ryuji. At that moment, one of the boys tries to warn the blonde that this was terrible, since Ryugo's brother had been beaten up by the transfer student. But before the brown-haired boy could continue speaking, he is hit by a kick from Ryugo. The bully starts to writhe on the ground, and in contrast, Ryugo walks over to the defeated body of his brother. He stares at Ryuji, who has a completely purple and bloody face. Upon recognizing the person in front of him, the blonde even tries to call for his brother, but before he can continue speaking, Ryugo steps on his face. This shocks the other bullies even more, and the cool guy immediately asserts that the weak deserve to lose. Then he starts taking money out of his wallet while asking the people around if they were talking about a transfer student. They quickly respond that yes, and at that moment, the blonde throws the bills he had taken into the air while ordering everyone there to find that transfer student. Thus, we move to a hamburger joint a little far from there. While looking at the menu, Aikido is even drooling at the pictures of the burgers. The boy tells the attendant that all the burgers look super delicious, and the girl responds that if Aikido had made up his mind, he should place his order. Then at that moment, the transfer student raises his hand saying he wanted everything on the menu, but Yuki responds that that might be a bit impossible. Thus, the boy starts choosing the combos he wants until he also points to a part of the menu that said smile. The attendant quickly smiles at him, then responds that there was what he wanted. In his utmost innocence, the crazy guy replies that he didn't know that meant smile because he thought it was actually something to eat. Yuki and the attendant feel quite awkward seeing that the boy didn't understand much about things. A little while later, the combos had already been served to our protagonist and his friend. While eating, Aikido shows that he is very happy, commenting that all that food is very good. On the other hand, the nerd seems a bit awkward and speechless. In his head, the boy is impressed by Aikido's reaction while eating a hamburger, and he wonders if it was the first time the boy had eaten one. He also realizes that it was the same thing during that earlier fight, since hitting someone's face quickly with a rock without hesitation was frightening. And that blonde in front of him was not normal at all. Yuki even remembers the moment when Aikido had said he was a convict and feels quite scared by that. So he asks the young man in front of him if he really is a criminal, and the boy responds without any concern that yes. Confused by this, Yuki asks why a criminal would be transferred to a school. Without hesitation, the criminal replies that some important people want him to solve the problems of that school. Aikido says that even though he has many questions, he really doesn't understand, but if he beats up thugs, his sentence is reduced. The nerd, upon hearing that, thinks that this is totally crazy. So he asks what Aikido's sentence is, and the boy prepares to answer. The blonde raises his 5 fingers, which are dirty with ketchup and mustard. Thus, the young man states that it was only 500 years, which leaves the nerd in front of him completely astonished. He thinks that the maximum prison sentence in Japan should be 30 years, and even according to juvenile law, it should be life imprisonment. Trembling with fear, the boy wonders if Aikido had committed murder, but at that moment, the blonde interrupts him. Suddenly, the crazy guy claims that he has thought of something extremely good. He starts stuffing fries into his sandwich as if he were creating a new dish. In a fit of madness, Aikido even pours soda on top of his sandwich. As he lifts his work of art up, he calls it Aikido's special hamburger, also saying that mixing good things would surely make it taste good. At that moment, he prepares to take a bite, but before he could realize it, outside the diner, several criminals with iron bars were preparing to break the window. Before Aikido could take a bite of his sandwich, a pipe hits the glass beside him, shattering it and sending his sandwich flying. Immediately, all the customers are startled, wondering why the windows had suddenly been broken. The blonde in the red sweatshirt crosses through the hole he made, climbing onto the table. Yuki, upon seeing this, recognizes the person. At that moment, he shouts that those were Ryugo Minena's henchmen. Aikido, on the other hand, was worried about something else because he had dropped his sandwich, and the nerd was questioning if he was listening. The leader of the group asks Aikido if he was the transfer student who had defeated Ryuji, then asserts that he wouldn't leave there in one piece. Yuki stands up, explaining that Ryugo was the brother of the person Aikido had just defeated, and he must have come seeking revenge. That's why they should leave, as even Aikido wouldn't be able to defeat 3 people. However, Yuki is violently struck in the face with a metal pipe. The blonde orders the loser to get out of the way, even asking Aikido to show his face. Completely immersed in the loss of his sandwich, the boy wonders if the 3-second rule was valid. However, his opponent doesn't notice the food in front of him and walks toward Aikido. At that moment, he steps on the criminal's special hamburger. This leaves the young man desperate upon seeing that his creation had been trampled. Confused, the bully asks Aikido what the hell he was talking about. Upon realizing what his opponent was referring to, the delinquent starts mocking the transfer student. He even says that if Aikido wanted that sandwich so badly, he should lick his shoe. Not knowing who he was dealing with, the crazy guy starts stepping even harder on the hamburger until he notices a strange movement from Aikido. The criminal grabs the guy in front of him, threatening him and saying he would kill him. The delinquent isn't scared at all, but before he realizes it, Aikido uses an object to break the boy's shin. This leaves the other 2 henchmen of Ryugo scared and even Yuki astonished. The blonde falls to the ground, writhing in pain. Furious about what happened, Aikido asks how that bastard dared to step on his special hamburger. Without hesitation, he grabs the collar of another henchman. Immediately, the criminal punches him, drawing blood from his nose. At the same moment, the boy turns around, landing a kick to the head of the last remaining enemy, while commenting that he hated those who ruined and wasted food. Now finally seeing who he was dealing with, the blonde who had stepped on the hamburger starts begging Aikido to stop. However, without letting him explain, our protagonist steps once more on his face. In the blink of an eye, the three bullies had been defeated by a single person. Yuki, who observed all of this, thinks that the crazy guy defeated 3 guys in an instant. Looking at his destroyed creation, Aikido laments. He even starts to cry, commenting that he would help the food rest in peace. Once again getting furious, Aikido shoves part of that sandwich into the mouth of the one responsible for the destruction of the food. The delinquent does the same with the other 2 henchmen, even stuffing the plastic into their mouths and asking them to say it was good, and the boys comply. Sometime later, Aikido heads to the counter, where we see that the waitress was completely scared and huddled in a corner. With the utmost nonchalance, the boy hands over some money while asking her for another combo and for another smile. Afraid of being the next target, the woman, still scared, smiles and agrees with him. Smiling back, the ex-convict says he would eat a lot. The sun sets over a beautiful city. Yuki and Aikido walk side by side, and the delinquent, clutching his stomach, says he had eaten too much, thanking Yuki afterward. The young man replies that he barely paid anything since Aikido used the delinquent's money, and looking at his new friend, the nerd states that he was really a strange person. Suddenly, a red-haired girl appears behind them. Catching her breath from running, she comments that she finally found Aikido. The blonde turns around, recognizing the young woman and calling her Fuyumi-chan. The nerd is impressed by the girl's beauty and asks who she could be. He wonders if the young woman was Aikido's older sister, but at that moment, Fuyumi cuffs Aikido's hands. She reprimands the criminal, stating that she had told him that acting alone was prohibited. The delinquent shifts the blame to Yuki, but without hesitation, Fuyumi starts dragging the boy back while commenting that she would talk to him later. Before leaving, the blonde says goodbye to his new friend but ends up forgetting his name. Yuki, frustrated, responds with his name, and Aikido finally remembers and once again says goodbye to the boy, who just waves. Night finally falls over the city. As he walks through the streets back home, the nerd thinks he is tired. In his head, he reflects on everything that happened at the diner and lets out a small laugh. Humming to himself, the nerd mentions that somehow it was fun. He prepares to turn a corner when he bumps into someone. Due to the person being muscular, the nerd falls to the ground. The unknown person extends their hand to the boy, asking if he is okay, and the 4-eyed boy promptly replies that he is fine and apologizes. Then he sees Ryugo in front of him. This makes the boy start to tremble, but on the other hand, the delinquent responds that he was looking for him. Now let's go to a building in the middle of the city at night. In the kitchen, Aikido was sitting at the dining table. While banging the cutlery on the table, the boy starts calling for Zetsu and asking her for food. Fuyumi responds to the blonde that there is no dinner for him tonight, and the boy immediately questions why. Zetsu retorts that this is a penalty for breaking the contract, which frustrates the boy. While crying like a baby, Aikido responds that he worked hard today and did nothing wrong. Suddenly, the pink-haired girl points her finger in the boy's face, which startles him. She states that he left without permission, caused damage to a restaurant, and committed other offenses. And in fact, he should be grateful for only missing dinner, which makes Aikido even more irritated. He starts fiddling with the object around his neck and asks if he can take off that collar, but Fuyumi replies no, as it tracks his location with the collar's GPS. And just so he knows, if he tries to remove it forcefully, the collar will explode, so Aikido complains that she should have warned him about that earlier. Zetsu also warns that it would explode if he moved more than 30 meters away from her, and the blonde continues explaining that he didn't mean any harm. And his friend Yuki had offered him hamburgers, which is why he accompanied the boy, so the woman inquires if he is referring to that boy from earlier. The boy promptly replies yes, and she immediately asks if Aikido forced him to pay, and playing dumb, the boy responds no. Because of that, Zetsu says he will also be without breakfast, which drives the ex-convict even crazier. As he sees the boy throwing himself on the ground, Mesh states that he should be grateful for having permission to live in an apartment under her supervision. At that moment, Fuyumi states that she will explain the details of that important mission once again. The system for transferring convicted students is a special system that sends juvenile offenders like Aikido to a designated school as transferred students, so that these delinquents can resolve issues at schools they could not enter, and the reward for success is a reduction in their sentence. However, that project was not just to improve the school environment, it was also to help Aikido and the other convicts learn to live a normal life. The boy, still grumbling, responds that he has heard that dozens of times during training. Now speaking seriously, Zetsu calls for Aikido. The girl asks if he wants to go back to the life he was leading. Upon hearing that, the young man begins to immerse himself in his thoughts. In a flashback, he sees a poor dead rat in front of him. Young Aikido, with his body completely dirty and filthy, stares at that poor lifeless animal. Back in reality, promptly replies that he does not want to go back to that life. Zetsu retorts that this is great and therefore decides to make a promise with Aikido. She extends her pinky and prepares to say something. The young woman states that if Aikido manages to win against everyone tomorrow, she will make a hamburger steak for him. Upon hearing this, the boy's eyes begin to shine, and he asks if this is true, and upon receiving confirmation, he becomes even happier. Thus, he touches his pinky to Zetsu's and responds that he will make this promise. The boy continues smiling, and the young woman, seeing that, smiles back. The next day, we see several delinquents gathered again. Walking among those bullies, Aikido starts humming that he's going to win a hamburger steak. However, upon seeing someone in front of him, the boy stops for a moment. Aikido and Ryugo stare at each other for a moment. Ryugo walks up to his enemy while stating that he has been waiting for him. The confused transfer student asks who that boy in front of him was. Without hesitation, the blonde introduces himself as Mineta Ryugo and then thanks Aikido for taking care of his brother. As he rolls up his sleeves, Aikido comments that it was very good for his enemy to come to him because that way he could start and finish things quickly. However, Ragudo asks the young man not to be in such a hurry because the one who would fight against the transfer student would not be him. It would be those guys behind him, and at that moment he points to some young men. While pointing at various nerds including Yuki, Ryugo comments that they really wanted to fight Aikido. At that moment, the ex-convict stares at his opponents. Yuki, who was among them, seems extremely downcast and traumatized. Confused, Aikido questions what the hell Yuki was doing. Scratching his head, he thinks for a moment. Once again, the boy asks if Yuki was really thinking of fighting against him. Just hearing that, the poor nerd starts to tremble and in his mind apologizes to Aikido, claiming he had no other choice. In a flashback, we see all those nerds hanging on a bridge about to fall into the sea. Yuki, who was in the middle, holds onto the edge as much as he can. We see that they were all in their underwear and the poor Four Eyes tries to stay upright and not fall. In his mind, the boy thinks he was in that situation because Mineta Ryugo had found him on the street. Trying to hold on as best as he could, the nerd also mentions that falling from that height would be fatal. Ryugo, while smoking, calls those poor boys losers and asks if they wanted to be saved, and they all promptly respond that they do. They all hear the sound of water and start begging, saying they would do anything to be saved. Thus, the psychopath orders the nerds to defeat that transfer student. Upon hearing that, Yuki is in shock. Another nerd responds that this transfer student was extremely dangerous. The long-haired boy next to him agrees, commenting that it was impossible, and that if he fought against that transfer student, he would be killed. This exhausts Ryugo's patience, who rolls his cigarette and steps on the long-haired boy's foot. He states that if that was the case, the nerd should die. At that moment, the psychopath makes the poor young man let go of the edge. As a result, he begins to fall freely toward the water. The fall is so strong that it creates a huge splash that shoots into the sky. Yuki, seeing this, becomes even more nervous. Without hesitation, Ryugo steps on the chubby boy's foot, getting closer to him and starting to intimidate him. He then asks what the boy was going to do, and in his mind, the young man promptly responds that if it was against Mineta, he would indeed die, and that's why he had no choice. We return to the present moment, and once again, Yuki apologizes to Akihito in his mind, but comments that he didn't want to die. Without hesitation, Rago prepares to start the fight. Ryugo asks the transfer student if he can really hurt his poor friend, who was being forced to fight by his orders. The ex-convict seems to get irritated and falls silent. The nerds, without hesitation, charge at their opponent, fearing for their lives. Yuki, who was in front, is quickly hit by a punch, sending his glasses flying. The blow is so powerful that it sends the chubby boy flying backward. This causes him to drag his back on the ground, stopping a few meters away. At the same moment, Aikido charges and knocks out another of his enemies with a kick to the stomach. He finishes off another with a punch to the chin. Finally, he strikes the last remaining one with a solid punch to the face. All the nerds are left extremely injured and unresponsive. Walking toward his opponent, Ryogo asks the transfer student if that boy with glasses wasn't his friend. Upon hearing this, Aikido seems to act with disdain. With his hand on his face, he asks Ryugo if he was really serious. This hurts Yuka even more than the punch he had received. Immediately, the boy refuses to believe it and shouts at Aikido that it was very cruel. The chubby boy states that they had eaten hamburgers together and everything, and he even thought he was really friends with the blonde, but still, Aikido hit him. Crying, Yuki even declares that it was betrayal. Aikido pauses for a moment and becomes thoughtful. He then questions why the hell the nerd tried to hit him. This leaves the Four Eyes in shock. Aikido says that if hitting a friend is betrayal, what Yuki was doing was also betrayal. Those words really affect the chubby boy, who starts to clench the dirt out of anger. The boy doesn't even know how to respond, remaining in shock. Ryugo, on the other hand, starts clapping at this situation. Walking towards Aikido, he claims that he likes the boy and was planning to kill him for what he had done to his brother, but he started to like him. Without hesitation, the blonde continues moving towards the ex-convict. In this way, Ryugo asks Aikido to join him. However, the boy immediately refuses with a look of disdain. Ryugo says he would provide money, women, and whatever Aikido wanted, and he would also feed him good food, which left the boy salivating. The young man begins to think about the proposal, however, he responds that he cannot. Hearing this, Mineta is surprised and asks why. As the lunatic he is, Aikido replies that it is because he would win a hamburger steak. Even Yuki is confused, so Aikido says that he made a promise. He approaches Ryugo and retorts that this is why he will not join him. Aikido provokes the bully's honor, which irritates him, and thus he declares that they should settle this now. And the way they would settle it would be with their fists at that school. The bullies, noticing that Ryugo is going to fight, begin to place their bets. Ryugo declares that the rules of the fight will be simple, and the winner will be the one who makes the opponent admit defeat. Aikido is surprised and asks if the fight is not to the death. Upon hearing that, Mineta responds that if Aikido died, he could not make him his subordinate. Thus, the blonde replies that he understands and prepares himself. The two opponents stare at each other for a moment. Everyone watching that fight is euphoric to know the outcome until it finally begins. Immediately, our protagonist charges at his enemy. He takes the opportunity to grab a brick that was being used as a barrier along the way. Seeing this, one of the bullies realizes that this guy is using a stone to fight again, and another one claims that this is cheating. Ignoring this fact, Aikido advances to strike his opponent. However, Rego manages to take a combat stance and easily dodges Aikido's attack. Then, after the pendulum, he rises and delivers a strong punch to Aikido's face. This leaves the ex-convict scared and quite surprised. Seeing this, all of Ryugo's lackeys begin to celebrate and flatter him. Due to the blow, a bit of ketchup starts to drip from Aikido's nose. One of the bullies questions whether Ryugo was not the guy who won the national junior boxing competition, and another bully agrees. Upon receiving that confirmation, the delinquent retorts that no amateur could defeat him, and at that moment, Aikido wipes the ketchup from his nose. In front of him, he sees Mineta still in his fighting stance. With a smile, our protagonist retorts that this is not too bad. However, ignoring his enemy, Ryugo advances towards him to strike. He attempts to throw a jab at Aikido, who dodges to the side. Without letting the boy think, Ryugo continues launching various attacks in his direction. Confused about which blow is real, Aikido does not notice that one of them is heading straight for his face. Once again, the despicable blonde hits Aikido squarely in the face. This makes the boy take a few steps back from the impact of the blow. Wanting to end this as quickly as possible, Mineta assumes a stance, moving the lower part of his body. In this way, he lands a powerful cross to Aikido's stomach. This makes the boy spit out even more red sauce. Yuki, watching all of this, becomes desperate, not believing that this is happening to Aikido. All the spectators of the fight begin to mock the transfer student, urging him to give up before he faces more embarrassment. Ryugo, underestimating the convict, tells him to get up and not disappoint him. Aikido seems not at all intimidated, wiping his face once again. At that moment, he runs towards Ryugo, grabbing the blonde's leg. The man, seeing this, appears surprised. Seeing this, one of the delinquents realizes that the transfer student has gone for a single leg, questioning what will happen now. Even with that, Ryugo shows experience in combat and lowers his body weight, throwing it against Aikido. Seeing that he could not move, the transfer student becomes desperate. Mineta comments that this was indeed a smart move since the legs are a boxer's weak point. And when he assumes this stance, someone always wants to grab his legs, but in this case, it was enough to pin them to the ground, and they would not be able to do anything. Thinking he still had the upper hand, Aikido responds that he misunderstood something. At that moment, the boy goes to punch his opponent's foot. Aiming to strike Ryugo's foot, Aikido asserts that this is not a boxing match but a street fight, and anything goes. That sudden movement startles all the viewers. Despite seeing this, Mineta does not react and allows himself to be hit. For some reason, when hitting Mineta's shoe, Aikido injures his hand. Because of this, he falls backward, screaming in pain. Confused, one of the bullies questions why the transfer student was screaming in pain when he was the one who had struck. While hitting his shoe, revealing a metallic sound, Ryugo calls the boy an idiot. Confident, he states that no fist could defeat steel. Immediately, Yuki realizes that the bastard had manipulated his shoe. Taking advantage of this opening, Ryugo lands another punch on Aikido. Hitting the ex-convict, the blonde tells the transfer student that he was right since this was not boxing, but a street fight. Yuki begins to panic and cry, thinking that this was what Aikido deserved for fighting against Ryugo-san, and that Aikido was nothing more than a punching bag now. Moreover, at this rate, he would die. However, our protagonist was still determined. Yuki, watching his friend get hurt badly, becomes very worried. Ryugo starts walking towards Aikido, noticing that he was bleeding a lot, asks if the boy wanted a napkin. However, the blonde begins to get up, responding that it was nothing. He claims that Mineta said he was the strongest but hid steel plates in his shoes, making excuses that this was how delinquents operated. Once again, Aikido wipes the blood from his mouth. Now with the psychopathic expression, he asserts that maybe Ryugo wasn't so confident in his own boxing. Upon hearing this, Mineta's lackeys become irritated, and Yuki is surprised. Even irritated, Mineta tells the transfer student that he can say whatever he wants and calls him a half-dead punk. At this moment, the transfer student begins to try to imitate Mineta's stance. Our protagonist starts punching the air as if he were learning boxing at that very moment. This leaves the leader of the bullies quite surprised and intrigued. Seeing what Aikido is doing, he clearly recognizes those movements. But ignored, the ex-convict responds that he has taken many hits. And giving small jumps on the ground, he questions if that was boxing since he had memorized and learned it. Seeing this, Ryugo comments that it was interesting. In the blink of an eye, our protagonist charges at his opponent in front of him. He tries to hit the giant with several punches, but Ryugo dodges all of them. The bully tells the transfer student that he was doing everything wrong, even claiming that he would teach him a lesson. This leaves Aikido confused, not understanding what he was trying to say. While defending against one of the blows with his shoulder, Ryugo explains that Aikido should keep his feet shoulder-width apart. Then he explains that the boy should keep his elbows close to his ribs. After that, the boy should plant his feet firmly on the ground and lean slightly forward. Since this was the way to throw a punch, he demonstrates in practice by trying to hit Aikido. But the ex-convict manages to dodge to the side. However, Ryugo states that the jab was just a feint. For this way, he created an opening with the jab, and then the boy begins to rotate his lower body. At that moment, he lands a straight punch squarely on Aikido's face. Once again, the ex-convict is hit squarely in the face. Still maintaining his fighting stance, Ryugo says that this was the basics of the 1-2. Even with his nose bleeding, Aikido does not give up and tries once more to hit his enemy, who simply steps back. Our protagonist seems quite weak due to the blow he had taken, and even trying to attack once more, he misses. The bullies watching that fight start mocking him, saying that he hit like a little girl and was very amateurish. However, a much faster punch than the others appears in front of Ryugo's face. Even so, the blonde is quick to dodge and immediately counterattacks, hitting Aikido. This further boosts the morale of the other students, who continue celebrating. Akihido's face continues to pour down blood. Confident of his victory, Ryugo asks if his opponent enjoyed that demonstration, also asking him to admit defeat. However, something makes the young man stop talking for a moment. In front of him, he sees the transfer student with a smile on his face, even with his bloody face. Like a madman, Aikido starts laughing even in this situation. This even leaves the crazy Ryugo paralyzed. Once again, our protagonist charges at his enemy while calling him a bastard. Ryugo immediately strikes him without giving him a chance. However, the blonde notices something, seeing that he had hit his enemy's hand. This time we see that Aikido managed to defend his attack since he was in a high guard. The bullies and even Yuki noticed that Aikido had raised his guard. At this moment, the transfer student begins to practice what he had learned from his opponent. He repeats the same feint and body rotation movements. Seeing that he was already prepared, he thanks Ryugo for the lesson. This leaves Mineta furious, causing veins to appear on his head. But without giving him time to think more about it, Aikido advances towards his opponent. He starts throwing several jabs as feints. The various quick strikes confuse Ryugo's mind. He thinks to himself that his opponent was indeed very fast. Our protagonist does not give up and continues trying to strike his enemy, who uses evasive maneuvers to the side. However, suddenly the transfer student goes for a new attack. He strikes with a hook this time, and his enemy ends up dropping his guard. Ryugo and all the bullies realize what had happened. Now Aikido uses the rotation of the lower part of his body. With that, he lands a straight punch right in Mineta's face, just as he had been taught. This sends the blonde flying backward, causing ketchup to spill from his nose. The transfer student, with a smile on his face, asks if his opponent liked that. Seeing their leader defeated, all the bullies run away, not believing that he had actually lost. Yuki, who watched that fight, realizes that in a short period of time, Aikido observed Ryugo's movements and learned them perfectly. The bully, recovering from the blow, calls Aikido a bastard and questions who he was. The young man simply replies that he was just a transfer student. The delinquents watching that fight become scared upon hearing that the transfer student was a convict. Ryugo retorts that Aikido was a lunatic and orders him not to interfere where he doesn't belong. However, our protagonist grabs the blonde's hair, lifting him up. The transfer student begins to intimidate Ryugo, saying that it was cute for him to say that since he was the one who started all this trouble. Akihito states that Ryugo was forcing those guys who just want a normal school life to fight, and he and the bullies were the ones intruding into the lives of innocents. And that was why he was doing the same to Ryugo, as he would punish him for what he did. Ryugo removes his enemy's hand from his hair and questions why he was going so far, considering Aikido wasn't even friends with those nerds. Yuki, witnessing the scene, remains silent and a bit in shock. Then Akihito responds that he does this because he wants to live freely. Yuki's eyes widen upon hearing that. At that moment, Aikido slams his fist against his hand, declaring that this was the last round. He even claims that he would spectacularly knock out Ryugo with his hypergram punch. This makes the blonde even angrier, as he stands up, furious and threatening his opponent. The two bullies charge at each other. Ryugo tries to knock out his opponent, who dodges to the side. Once again, Aikido throws a jab towards Mineta, who evades. Thus, the battle continues with an intense exchange of blows between the two students. Exhausted, Ryugo unleashes a powerful attack. He ends up striking towards Aikido, who barely dodges. However, our protagonist fails to notice something and in an instant is hit with a jab to the face. This leaves Yuki worried, thinking that his friend had lost. Ryugo, on the other hand, breathes a sigh of relief, believing he has won. However, our protagonist reveals that he had defended the blow with his forehead. He uses his opponent's distraction to charge a strike, and with that, he lands a cross right on Ryugo's face. The blonde gets hit on the chin and ends up spitting ketchup. Stating that his opponent was dazed, Aikido charges at him again, declaring that it was time for the super punch Aikido. Ryugo, recovering, doesn't know from which hand Aikido's punch will come. Aikido clenches his fists as if deciding which one he would use to strike Ryugo, but the blonde can't guess. Then our protagonist hits his enemy with a heel kick. This not only weakens the delinquent further, but also surprises him as he didn't expect that. The bully falls to his knees on the ground, powerless. Akihito, seeing that his strike had worked, stares down his opponent. While all the bullies cried out of fear and anger, Yuki celebrated, looking at his friend. The former convict does the same, looking at Yuki and sending a peace sign. Once again, Meg falls over a fancy apartment. Inside, the suited men were having a meeting, and Fuyui, at the end of her report, states that the delinquent school has improved in just days. However, some damages were also reported, and that was the end of the report. Another gentleman thanks her and asks her to continue her work. At that moment, Fuyumi thanks him and leaves the place. One of the suited men states that he still could not accept that and questions why the director approved such a project. And another one wonders what methods Zetsu Fuyumi used. At this hour, the girl arrives at her and Akihido's apartment, immediately notifying the young man who was at home. Akihido receives the girl and asks her to look at something urgently. He points to the TV, and we see that a report is airing about several high school students who were arrested on suspicion of assault. Upon seeing that, Akihido becomes extremely happy, claiming that the news was about him and that he was amazing. Seeing this, Fuyumi congratulates the boy. Sitting on the sofa, the blonde comments that by having crushed those guys, he earned 100 points and something else had happened. In a flashback, we see Yuki approaching Akihido and calling him. The nerd thanks the transfer student for coming to that school and states that he would like to buy him hamburgers as a sign of reparations. Returning to the current moment, the blonde mentions that those hamburgers were indeed delicious and Fuyumi seems pleased. The delinquent does not stop climbing onto the sofa and saying that thanks to this, he also earned money and could eat a lot of food now. This leaves the girl with pink hair confused, and she asks if he was talking about the money from the fight game bets, to which he promptly replies yes. Thus, Zetsu retorts that she would collect all the money from those bets, which leaves Akihido confused, questioning why. She explains that if he accepted that money, he would also be arrested due to the fight game. Immediately, the boy agrees that it was fine since he was already a criminal anyway, and Fuyumi asks him not to use his criminal situation as an excuse. Then the girl mentions that he did well in his first school. And now the boy had 499 years and 265 days left in prison and still had a long way to go. However, Akihido jumps off the sofa, responding that he would be fine since he would take down many criminals and earn a huge amount of points. Zetsu asks him not to let his guard down because the previous school had relatively obvious problems, but the next school would not be so easy. Fuyumi recognizes the next school where Akihido would be acting and thinks to herself that that place would not be easy to resolve because an invisible malice was at work there. At that moment, the young woman touches Akihido's shoulder and begins to speak seriously. She asks him to focus on earning points and defeating people, but the important thing was the feeling of helping others, because if he saw someone who seemed to have problems or was hurt, Akihido should help them. And with a smile on his face, the boy quickly agrees. Zetsu responds that this is very good, then warns that they would prepare for tomorrow and sleep early, and Akihido agrees. The next day, Fuyumi asks if Akihido had picked up his lunch and if he was really okay going alone, and the boy asks her not to treat him like a child. Zetsu informs him that the school information was on Akihido's smartphone and that he should not forget to check it, and she prepares to mention something else about the school. However, the young man immediately leaves while stating that he was already going, even with Fuyumi asking him to wait. The young woman thinks that before she could warn him about what she wanted, the young man had already left. We then see a beautiful city illuminated by sunlight. Akihido walks down the street while fiddling with his smartphone. Looking at the GPS, the boy wonders where he was and what the north path was, until suddenly, something in front of him catches his attention. He sees a guy with a mafia look talking to a little girl. Upon seeing this scene, he thinks of Fuyumi saying that if he saw someone with problems or hurt, he should help. Thus, something ignites in Akihido's mind, leaving the boy determined. At that moment, he calls out to the mafioso, ordering him to step away from that young girl immediately. The man does not seem intimidated, questioning who Akihido was and if he knew who he was looking for a fight with, even stating that children should be at home. Before the scoundrel could continue speaking, he is quickly struck in the face with a kick. Seeing that he managed to hit his opponent, our protagonist smiles. After being hit, the mafioso tries to retaliate and charges at the child in front of him. Akihido, using the boxing skills he had learned, manages to dodge to the side. He remembers the lessons Ryugo taught him about keeping his elbows close to his sides and stepping firmly on the ground. In this way, the delinquent begins to repeat what he had learned, swinging forward and throwing a punch in the direction of the mobster. The man barely manages to dodge, not realizing that the jab was just a feint. With this, Akihido creates an opening and then rotates the lower part of his body. This way, he lands a solid straight punch right in the face of that bully. Immediately, the man, despite being extremely larger, is knocked out by Akihido. Looking at his own fists, the ex-convict thinks that it really worked well. The girl beside him is surprised by what she saw, and Akihido looks at her. Upon seeing the beautiful young woman, a flame quickly ignites in his heart. At that moment, the innocent girl thanks Akihido for his help. Totally embarrassed, he says it was no problem and asserts that helping people is something natural. The girl, also with rosy cheeks, says that if it was okay with Akihido, she would like to get his contact information because she wanted to thank him properly later. Immediately, the two exchange contacts and we see that the girl's name was Kasumi. As she leaves, the girl thanks Akihido for his help, but mentions that she needed to go to school soon. However, she warns that she would get in touch with him later. Our protagonist, who is a tough lunatic, was completely overwhelmed by love. Immediately, he returns to reality thinking that he needed to get to school quickly or he would miss dinner again. Finally, after some time, the boy approaches a school. Inside a classroom, several girls can be seen talking and interacting about makeup. At this moment, the teacher arrives, asking everyone to be quiet because that day she would introduce a transfer student. The teacher asks Akihido to come up to her and introduce himself to everyone. Somewhat embarrassed to be in front of so many people, the young man begins to say that his name is Akihido. However, Upon looking ahead, something surprises him. In his mind, he wonders why there were only girls in that school. The girls are also intrigued to see a male transfer student in an all-girls school for the first time, and one of them even comments that he is cute. They even tease Aikido about his collar, making him even more embarrassed. However, once again, something catches his attention in front of him. Our protagonist sees at the back of the room that girl he had met earlier. The two exchange glances, recognizing each other immediately, staring at the girl he had fallen in love with. Akihito immediately thinks that this is what people call destiny. Immediately, Kasumi points at Akihito, realizing he was the same boy she saw in the morning. A friend sitting in front of her asks if Kasumi knew him, and the young girl replies that Akihito helped her when some scary people were bothering her. Upon hearing this, all the girls start to ship the two, claiming that this was destiny. Our protagonist feels embarrassed, wondering if he and Kasumi were meant for each other. The teacher interrupts the conversations, asking them to talk later and stating that, as she was saying, Akihito would join the class starting that day. The woman also instructs Akihito to sit in an empty spot at the back of the room, and the young man immediately obeys. After sitting down, the boy looks to the side and tells his classmate that he would be sitting next to her from now on, and that it was a pleasure to meet her. However, the poor girl just glances sideways at Akihito, but soon after she returns to looking at her desk, ignoring the boy. Seeing this, the blonde comments to himself that the girl was very mean. As he gets lost in his thoughts, Akihito also tells himself that he wished he could sit next to that girl. After some time, the clock beeps, signaling that it was 12 o'clock. Taking a deep breath, the blonde thinks that it was finally lunchtime and he really hated studying. Suddenly, a familiar girl with black hair approaches. With a smile on her face, Kasumi asks Akihito if he would like to have lunch with her, and the boy promptly agrees. In a romantic gesture, the young girl takes the delinquent's hand while guiding him in a direction. Feeling the feminine touch on his hand, the ex-convict turns as red as a tomato. The girls, seeing Akihito's lunch, compliment him, saying it looked really delicious. Kasumi asks if his mother made it, but Akihito replies that no, it was someone else. The young girl then asks if it was his girlfriend who made it, but Akihito responds that no, because Fuyumi-chan was like his older sister. Thus, Kasumi asks again if the boy really didn't have a girlfriend, and he answers once more that he did not. Upon hearing this, the girl seems happy and comments that this is good. After hearing this, our protagonist is even more in shock. Kujo decides to introduce herself properly and reveals that her name is Kujo Kasumi and she is the class representative. So if there are any questions, Akihito can call her. Kasumi's friend asks why Akihito was transferred to their school, and her friend adds that it was surprising to see a boy attending a girl's school. The protagonist then reveals that he came there to solve the problems of that school, which leaves the girls confused. He explains that if there were any delinquent boys bothering them, he would beat them up, which ends up getting some laughs from the young girls who say he is interesting. Therefore, Akihito asks Kujo if something bad is happening at that school, and the girl responds that there isn't, questioning back if he has seen anything problematic there. Confused, the boy also reveals that he hasn't seen anything strange around. In this way, Kasumi comments that since there is nothing wrong, Akihito should just enjoy a normal school life, which leaves the boy confused. She says he should do things like hang out with friends, study, participate in clubs, and also spend time with a girlfriend, and the boy smiles while listening to this. Suddenly, the girl warns that the blonde had a bit of ketchup on his mouth, and immediately she starts to clean it for him. This tightens the heart of poor Akihito even more, who can only think that she is cute. Suddenly, the girl lowers her head as if she is getting embarrassed. She decides to take action and asks Akihito to call her by her first name, Kasumi. Upon hearing this, the boy goes into even more shock at her sudden request. She asks him to try saying it, and even though he is embarrassed, Akihito does so, which impresses Kasumi's other friends, who call him cute. While having fun with those girls, our protagonist wonders what that feeling was, since he really didn't understand why he was so happy. However, in the back of the classroom, the same girl who had ignored Akihito was staring at him having fun. Something was going through her mind, but not a single word was spoken by the young girl. Sometime later, we see the ex-convict walking through the school corridors. The boy tells himself that in the end, nothing happened today and that school was completely peaceful, so he wonders if Fuyumi ended up sending him to the wrong school. Suddenly, someone calls out to Akihito, making the boy look back. At that moment, Kasumi appears, hugging the boy's arm. This makes him shy as he realizes that Kujo's spheres were touching his arm and that it was soft, so she suggests that they go home together, and he agrees. Later, the ex-convict finishes telling the story about how he defeated the bullies from the last school he attended, and Kasumi responds that he is really very strong. With boldness, the girl tells Akihito that she really likes strong guys. Once again, the ex-convict ends up blushing like a tomato. He realizes that this meant Kasumi liked him, and so the boy questions whether he was popular. Akihito simply accepts this, smiling with happiness. Kasumi then asks her classmate that if those strange guys from the morning came back to bother her, would Akihito protect her, and the boy responds that he would. Clenching his fists, Akihito comments that he would definitely protect her. In his mind, he thinks that this girl definitely liked him, and probably this is what people call love. Time passes, and we go to the building where Fuyumi lived. Akihito arrives, announcing that he is home, and Fuyumi welcomes him and comments that he really respected the return touch today. Without thinking much, Akihito immediately throws himself onto the sofa. The pink-haired girl then questions him about how it went and if by any chance he had made any progress. Akihito does not respond and just thinks for a moment. Annoyed, Fuyumi asks if Akihito is listening to her. The ex-convict replies that there were no problems at that school. Moreover, he had given up on being a condemned transfer student. This leaves Fuyumi quite confused as she does not understand what he is talking about. Akihito repeats that he was going to stop being a condemned transfer student and would have a happy school life with Kasumi-chan. In this way, Zetsu questions what the hell the boy is saying. The girl asserts that he is in a special release state and cannot allow that. While eating, Akihito seems to get irritated. The boy turns around, questioning why that is since he just wanted to live a normal life like everyone else. Even feeling bad hearing those words, Fuyumi prepares to respond that it was because he was a criminal, and if Akihito gave up on the project, he would have to be sent back to solitary confinement. Upon hearing this, Akihito seems to come to terms with reality, even though he feels quite sad. That the boy panics, telling Fuyumi that he understood and apologizing, even saying that he would continue to be a condemned transfer student. And even with a sad expression, he agrees to do his work. But a day passes and he arrives in front of that school again. Facing the door of his classroom, the boy thinks that there really was nothing wrong with that school, and so he wonders what he should do. After thinking about it, he finally opens the door and enters the place. With his eyes closed, the boy says good morning to everyone who was there. But when he opens his eyes, a shocking scene appears before him. He sees that Kasumi's friends and she were cutting the hair of that girl who had ignored him the day before. The young girl looked devastated and traumatized, just crying and not reacting. Kasumi, who seems so cute, only celebrates. She then comments that the haircut looked nice. With a wicked smile, Kasumi comments that the girl in front of her was renewed and that haircut suited her very well. Suddenly, she notices Akihito's presence and calls out to him. Kasumi approaches him, explaining that they were doing Madoka's hair and then inviting Akihito to join. Madoka's hair ends up falling at our protagonist's feet, who is still in shock from all of this. Thus, he asks the girl who was being bullied why her hair was shaved. Kasumi answers for Madoka, saying that hairstyle had been in fashion recently and that Madoka had said it looked good. Then, with a frightening aura, she asks the girl if she agreed. Madoka, with no other choice and completely pressured, just agrees. Akihito, being the idiot he was, feels more at ease, stating that he thought this was bullying. Then Kasumi and her friends just smile, and the crazy girl hugs Madoka, who was on the ground. The bitches laugh like psychopaths, while Kasumi mentions that Akihito was really funny. In his head, the ex-convict thinks that this was obvious and there was no way Kasumi would intimidate or bully someone. Madoka, on the other hand, was completely stunned and traumatized by everything she had suffered. Time passes and class begins but ends quickly. The teacher tells Akihito and Madoka that the cleaning task for that week would be with the two of them, also explaining that they would take turns based on the seating arrangement. Akihito, who didn't like working at all, complains and wonders why it had to be him, and for some reason, Madoka next to him was again with hair. The two then start cleaning the floor of the place. The girl seemed quite sad and had a defeated expression. Akihito, looking at Madoka, thinks that this was really strange. Acting like an idiot, he asks why the girl was wearing a wig since she had managed to get such a nice hairstyle. And when ignored, she questions why the girl was acting like that. Then Madoka, annoyed by this, asks if Akihito was being sarcastic. In his head, he wonders if girls shouldn't be happy when he complimented their hairstyle since Fuyumi was happy when he complimented hers. Still confused, Akihito questions if the girl's hairstyle wasn't in fashion since she had chosen it herself, and that's why he asks why she was hiding it. Madoka, irritated by that guy's idiocy, responds that no one would do that willingly. Confused, Akihito asks why she was so angry. But traumatized, the girl replies that she just didn't want to talk to someone who sucked up to that kind of person. This once again leaves our protagonist confused. He asks who Madoka was referring to. Exploding with fury, the girl responds that it was about Kujo Kasumi, since because of that damn girl, not only she but other students were also suffering. Indignant, Akihito doesn't believe it and intimidates Madoka, questioning if she had proof of this. Thus, Madoka begins to take off her wig, asking the boy to look at her head closely. Then, upon seeing that the ex-convict is in complete shock, it is revealed that various malicious things were inscribed on Madoka's head with a knife. Seeing that, the transfer student asks what the hell that was, and Madoka promptly replies that all of this was done by Kujo Kasumi. Still doubting, the transfer student responds that this was a lie because Kasumi was very kind and cute. Because of that, there was no way someone like Kasumi could do something so terrible, and probably Madoka was making it up. Tired of this, the bullied student hits Akihito in the face. Filled with rage, she asserts that Akihito had only known Kasumi for a few days, and there was no way he could know almost anything about her. Madoka says that Akihito claimed he could solve the problems at that school, but in reality, he was just acting as if he were better than everyone else and couldn't do anything. At that moment, Kasumi enters the room, questioning Akihito about what was going wrong, leaving Madoka in complete shock. Desperate, she looks at Kujo, who simply looks back at her. The ex-convict quickly responds that he was hit by Madoka, which confuses Kujo. She approaches Madoka, questioning why the hell the girl was doing this. Like the monster she was, Kujo instills fear in Madoka as she orders her to apologize to Akihito right now. Shaking and with her worst nightmare on her back, Madoka bends down, apologizing to Akihito. At that moment, Kasumi asked Akito to forgive the girl since she had done it without thinking, and the blonde promptly says it was all right. Kujo asks if the boy had just finished cleaning, and upon receiving confirmation, she suggests they go home together, to which Akito readily agrees. On the other hand, Madoka remains in the room, trembling with fear and completely traumatized by everything she had suffered. The day begins to end, and the sunset was radiating over the city. As he walks alongside his beloved, Akito thinks it was very nice to be with Kasumi, and the girl smelled very good. Normal life was truly the best. Unintentionally, Akito lets slip, speaking softly, that he wanted to be with Kasumi forever. Upon hearing that, the girl asks what Akito was talking about, and he immediately realizes he said it out loud. Kujo then responds that she also wanted to be with him forever, which leaves the boy quite embarrassed. Embarrassed, Kasumi asks Akihito if he could go to the empty classroom tomorrow at 8 o'clock since she had something important to discuss with him. Not imagining that it could be a trap, Akiko agrees. Upon hearing this, Kujo becomes very happy, saying it was a promise and linking her pinky finger with Akito's. At that moment, they both say goodbye, each going in a different direction. But before leaving, the girl seems to remember she had to do something and starts walking towards Akito. She then kisses the boy's cheek, leaving him stunned. The ex-convict is incredulous about what just happened and doesn't react. After doing that, Kasumi goes where she had to, saying she would come to Akito later. Still in shock from everything that happened, the idiot declares that he would marry that girl. As night fell over the city, Kasumi was returning home. Until, while walking, the girl encounters that bully who had intimidated her the other day. The mobster and the girl stare at each other until he decides to approach her. But in reality, the man bows before Kasumi, revealing himself to be her subordinate. Then, as they approach her house, we see several butlers and mobsters bowing before Kasumi. All of them maintain serious faces until the guy in the purple shirt thanks Kasumi for her work. And then there's the flame of a little boss. The next day, we go to the school that Akito was tasked with solving the problems. Remembering Kasumi's request, the boy can't sit still, wondering what the hell she wanted to talk to him about. Our protagonist even wonders if Kasumi was going to confess to him, then saying that if that happened, they could get married soon. Moreover, first would come the wedding, and they would do it in a place called a chapel. Not only that, but he also wanted to have 3 children. But before that, he would kiss Kasumi a lot until finally, the classroom door opens. Akito calls for Kasumi, thinking it was her who had entered the room. However, who appears there is Madoka. Our protagonist questions the girl about why she was there since he was waiting for Kasumi. The girl with the wig remains silent for some reason. Irritated, the blonde says that if she had something to say, she should just say it. And the boy also questions if she wanted to hit him again instead of saying something. However, for some reason, Madoka confesses that she liked the boy. Akito is in shock, and the girl continues to assert that she has always liked him. The blonde is astonished, not believing that a girl had just confessed to him until, for some reason, Madoka starts to take off her clothes. Desperate, Akihito tells Kasumi that it's not what it looks like because that girl started undressing by herself, and even though he liked it, he didn't want to because he loved Kasumi. Meanwhile, the girl with black hair, now adopting a new personality and with a cigarette in her mouth, complains. She calls Akito boring and questions why he didn't start doing that sooner. The blonde boy is confused, asking why the girl was acting this way. Kujo rudely approaches, blowing cigarette smoke in Akihito's face. After that, the mafia girl says she was going to record his sexual harassment and ruin the young man's life. Akito questions what was wrong since that vulgar way of speaking wasn't how she really was, also commenting that smoking would harm his future children. Meanwhile, the mafia girl grabs the collar of the blonde. The crazy girl starts to intimidate him, questioning what the hell the boy knew about her since they had only spent a few days together. Akihito agrees that they hadn't spent much time together, but comments that the size of his love made up for it. After hearing this, Kujo says that his love and he were disgusting and starts laughing, while her friends film the whole scene. The young man is confused, asking why the girl was saying these things since she seemed to like him, remembering that Kujo even said they would be together forever. But before he could continue speaking, Kasumi extinguishes the cigarette that was in her mouth on the boy's forehead. Like a mad woman, she declares that she would never like a guy with a potato face like Akihito, calling him an idiot afterward. Upon hearing those words and feeling the pain of the cigarette on his forehead, the boy steps back, refusing to believe that this was true. All of Kasumi's friends continue laughing and recording while the tough girl reports that Akino-kun was really fun. Still not believing it, the transfer student throws himself, hugging Kasumi's waist and saying that this wasn't true and that he was really thinking about marrying her. Akito even declares that this was extremely cruel. Tired of this, the mafia girl uses her phone to hit Akito's face while saying that his breath stank. This causes blood to splatter on the young girl's shoe. Seeing that her piece of clothing had been stained, she becomes even more irritated. At that moment, she orders Madoka to lick it off immediately. Upon hearing this, the girl can't believe it and hesitates for a moment. However, feeling the pressure from Kasumi ordering her to lick and all the phones pointed at her, Madoka sees no other way out. At that moment, the poor girl crouches down and begins to clean Akihito's blood off Kujo's shoe with her tongue. Like the psychopath she was, Kujo continues to tease, questioning if that was good and if Madoka was enjoying it. Then she calls for Aikido, saying that the boy was an idiot, and he promptly responds, questioning if she was referring to him. With the utmost shamelessness, Kujo orders Aikido to shave Madoka's head, and then he could become her pet. For some reason, the blonde pauses for a moment and starts to think. While removing Madoka's wig, Kasumi remarks that she thought Madoka would look better with even shorter hair, about 5 millimeters. Upon hearing that, the friends of that psychopath start laughing, saying that this was basically going bald. At that moment, Aikido begins to remember his conversation with Madoka while they were cleaning the classroom. As he stands up, the blonde asks Kasumi if everything that had happened up to that point was a lie. Sarcastically, the girl responds that this was obvious and that anyone who had lived a normal life would understand that. So the blonde simply replies that he understands and extends his hand to take Kasumi's razor. The lunatic starts saying that Aikido was really a good boy. At that moment, he prepares to cut Madoka's hair, who just kneels there without reacting. Everyone around influences our protagonist to do this until strands of black hair fall to the ground. We see that, in fact, Aikido had done this to Madoka, who was in shock at seeing her beautiful hair fall. The girl looking up can't believe what she sees. Aikido, with the crazy girl's hair in his hand, says that the cut really suited Kasumi. Moreover, as she had said earlier, this was fashion. Still incredulous about what happened, Kasumi places her hand on her head. Staying her own hair in her hand, she grabs her phone to look at her reflection. The young girl, upon seeing that her hair had indeed been cut, remains silent for a moment, until suddenly the girl lets out a scream of despair, saying that this couldn't be real. Akihito, laughing sarcastically, says he knows this is fashion, but he really doesn't understand. Kasumi was actually similar to something he had heard about in school, a defeated samurai. Upon hearing that, the girl felt even more anger. Madoka and Kasumi's friends were shocked to see that. However, a redhead who was close to the bully let out a giggle. Hearing that, the bully turned to her friend with a glare. Immediately, with a frightening expression, she asked who had just laughed. All the girls were scared, and the girl who laughed quickly replied that it wasn't her. The girl kept trying to say she hadn't laughed, but at that moment, Kasumi grabbed the razor from Aikido's hand. In an instant, she struck her friend, cutting her face. Furious, she lunged at another girl, injuring the poor young woman's face. Blinded by rage, she continued attacking her classmates. After hurting all those she called friends, the girl sighed in hatred. Looking back, Kujo realized that neither Aikido nor Madoka were there. Clenching the razor in anger, Kasumi declared that Aikido couldn't think he would escape, as she would definitely send him to hell. By nightfall, we move to the city center. We see Madoka pulling Aikido away, and the blonde asks to be let go. The girl comments that if they had made it this far, they should be safe for now. Immediately, Madoka apologizes to Aikido. The girl states that she thought he was an idiot. Upon hearing this, the boy gets stressed, but Madoka continues, saying he wasn't an idiot, just someone with a pure heart. The boy calms down and responds that he is the one who should apologize, doing so afterward, and the girl agrees. However, the blonde comments that the girl was also confusing, as if she didn't like something, she should have said so. But Madoka reveals that she couldn't, as no one could go against Kasumi, and Aikido questions why. Madoka, confused, asks if the boy didn't know or had never heard of the Kujo Kai, and upon hearing this, Aikido looks puzzled. The young woman reveals that they are a Yakuza group that dominated that area, and Kasumi's father is their leader. Using this power, Kasumi did whatever she wanted at school, and anyone who challenged her or whom she didn't like would be crushed by her. Madoka reveals that amidst all this, her friend refused to bow to her power and tried to stop Kasumi. But that act didn't end well, so in a flashback, we see Madoka's friend on the school balcony. The young woman, with her face all disfigured from being beaten, continues to cry. Kasumi starts shouting for her to jump, but the poor girl still hesitates. But already tired of this, the damned daughter of a mobster pushes the poor girl toward the ground. This even scares the bullies, and Madoka, seeing this, is in shock. Laughing, Kujo tells her friends to look because that girl's arm was bent the wrong way. The other girls, stunned by this scene, question whether that young woman was dead and if it had become dangerous. Hearing this, the bully turns around and asks what her friends were grumbling about. Immediately, with a psychopathic look, she orders all the girls to laugh at that. The other girls can't go against Kasumi and start laughing, except for Madoka, who was still scared by everything. Because of this, Kujo approaches Madoka, asking her to try to laugh too. She even puts her finger in Madoka's mouth, forcing the girl to do so. Still explaining how everything happened, Madoka states that she wanted to kill the part of her that gave in to Kasumi's threats. The girl also explains that afterwards she desperately appealed to a teacher she trusted. In a flashback, we see the gray-haired teacher who introduced Aikido, saying she would take care of everything Madoka mentioned, and the girl thanks her. Innocent Madoka thought this would change things a bit and that Kasumi's dictatorship would end. However, when she went to school the next day, she realized she was wrong. At that moment, Madoka encounters the teacher to whom she had told everything she knew, alongside Kasumi. Kasumi, with her usual expression, questions the teacher about what she had said. The woman then reveals that Madoka had told her about Kasumi's evil deeds. Upon hearing this, the psychopath approaches Madoka, asking why the girl said something like that about her. The psychopath also claims that from that moment on, Madoka would suffer something worse than death. Back in the present moment, the girl explains that this was when the bullying began every day constantly, and in truth, she had no one by her side. However, Aikido asserts that the girl had someone by her side, and the girl asks who that person was. And with a smile, the ex-convict replies that it was him. Upon hearing this, Madoka asks if the boy really heard what she said, asserting that if the blonde challenged Kasumi, he wouldn't come out unscathed. And the boy responds that he had already shaved her head anyway. Besides, he didn't mind dealing with the Yakuza, which leaves Madoka confused. The blonde then decides to reveal that he was a convict. Upon hearing that, the young man with blue eyes falls silent for a moment. She unintentionally lets out a laugh, and Aikido asks why the girl was laughing. Madoka reports that Aikido was a strange person, and she didn't know why, but she felt she could believe his words, and that in fact she thought Aikido might be able to change things. Then the girl says goodbye, stating that she would go home and see Aikido another day, and the boy agrees. Once alone, Aikido remembers Madoka saying that he might be able to change things, and that echoes in his head. Another day passes, and we return to that cursed school. The same teacher who had reported Madoka questions if Kasumi was absent that day, and she also notes that for some reason, Madoka was not there. After seeing that both girls were absent, Aikido seems confused. Immediately, he panics and worries. But with his foolish mind, the boy wonders if the two had caught a cold. Ignoring that, the teacher continues her lesson, saying they were going to be energetic today. But at that moment, a mobster dressed in a white suit bursts through the classroom door. Seeing that, Akihito stands up. He immediately questions who those muscular guys in front of him were. The mobster in the white suit calls for Aikido. Then he asserts that this would be the blonde boy's tomb. We go to a hotel far from where Aikido was, and a little while later, Kasumi asks Madoka what she thought of the hotel suite managed by her father's organization. While swirling a glass of wine, the young woman comments that Aikido must be getting beaten up by his goons, and soon a bunch of dirty old men would come there to do things that would make Madoka wish she were dead, and at that moment, we see that the girl was completely naked and tied up. While stepping on Madoka's face, Kujo also states that he would ensure everything happening there was recorded, and desperate, Madoka begins to say that she was scared. While looking at Kujo with his psychopathic face, the young woman silently begs for someone to help her. And at that moment, a sound comes from the door, and Kasumi says that the people she was waiting for have arrived. Upon hearing this, the poor girl who suffers bullying starts to tremble with fear. On the other hand, the spoiled girl immediately goes to open the door. With a smile on her face and her eyes closed, she welcomes the stranger, saying she had been waiting for him. However, something unexpected happens, and suddenly a punch hits her face. This sends the girl flying backward, knocking off the wig she was wearing. Kasumi is thrown so far that she ends up crashing against her bed. Looking at his phone and analyzing Kujo's profile, our protagonist realizes that the girl was worth more points than those delinquent brothers he had defeated. Madoka, realizing who had entered the room, is surprised. With a smile, Aikido apologizes to Kasumi, but asserts that he will have to hit her. Bleeding and trying to cover her baldness, the psychopath questions how the hell the boy was there. While running to free her friend, the blonde explains that those men in black suits told him where she was, and at that moment, the bodyguard rushes to help Kasumi. The protagonist then reveals that he beat those guys until they talked, and that's why they couldn't hold out for long and spilled the beans. Wiping the blood from her nose, Kasumi can't believe that this guy managed to defeat several men from her organization all by himself. Because of that, she wonders who that boy was. After freeing her friend, the blonde comments that he didn't expect Madoka to be captured. However, desperate and already tired of it, Madoka grabs the boy's hand, asking him to help her. Like the fool he was, the young man just smiles back, responding that he would help her. Furious, Kasumi orders Aikido not to mess with her because she was the daughter of the Kujukai, and he couldn't think he would leave that room alive. At that moment, the young woman commands Domoto, her bodyguard, to take care of him and kill him. Immediately, a wall rises and heads toward Aikido, the fully tattooed Yakuza man glaring at his target in front of him. Our protagonist, unafraid, asks the old man in front of him to step aside because he only wanted to hit Kasumi. On the other hand, the wall questions if Aikido thinks he could touch the young woman and leave there alive. However, before he could continue speaking, he is hit by a punch to his face. After hitting his target, the blonde seems startled by something. He sees that Domoto hadn't even moved an inch from the blow and is only bleeding a little from his nose. Immediately, our protagonist launches several attacks in Domoto's direction. The man remains motionless, questioning if Aikido was trying to imitate box. At that moment, he brings his hand towards the blonde. The bodyguard grabs the young man by the collar of his shirt. Then he lifts the protagonist as if he were nothing, preparing to throw him to the ground. In the air, Aikido thinks that this guy easily dodged his blows and lifted him with one hand. At that moment, Domoto throws the ex-convict against the ground, causing a huge impact. Kasumi is extremely happy to see this scene, while Madoka is desperate. Even with the impact, Aikido gets up, only complaining about the pain and calling that wall an old man. Without giving him time to think, the bodyguard grabs his enemy's arm. Then he throws the blonde away. As a result, Aikido ends up hitting some shells and injuring his back once again. Kasumi, already singing victory, explains that Domoto was a judo prodigy, which is why an ordinary high school student like Aikido couldn't defeat him. Taking off his jacket, the blonde reveals that he was not an ordinary high school student, but rather a transfer student from the convict. Domoto realizes what the boy was trying to do. After removing his top clothing, Aikido states that he knows Demoto was planning to grab him and throw him again, but he had no way to grab that. However, the bodyguard responds that he still can and advances his hand towards his opponent's chest. He places his fingers to grab the poor boy's collarbone. Upon feeling that pain, the ex-convict becomes confused. Without hesitation, the Yakuza guy applies another throw on his opponent, slamming him violently against the ground. Madoka, witnessing all this, is shocked. After the blow, Aikido remains motionless, lying down for a moment. Laughing, Kujiro says he had already told them it was useless since Demoto's finger strength was superhuman, and if there was a slight deviation, he could throw anything. However, once again, that transfer student gets up. This shocks everyone in the room, and Kasumi wonders how that guy could calmly stand up after that. Impressed, Demoto asks if his opponent had ever practiced judo, and Aikido replies that he hadn't. Then the bodyguard reveals that for someone who had never practiced this art, he completely neutralized that throw. Laughing, the lunatic responds that maybe it was because his mother used to throw him around a lot when he was a child, and upon hearing those words, Madoka is incredulous. Without hesitation, the wall charges at Aikido to end that fight. While preparing a cross, our protagonist calls Demoto an old man and says he is very slow. However, the Yakuza guy manages to grab his enemy's arm. Then he throws his feet over Aikido, executing a flying arm lock. The bodyguard lands perfectly with the move locked in, executing it quickly. Demoto states that after breaking Aikido's right arm, the next would be his left. Our protagonist, feeling immense pain, grits his teeth. Suddenly, with his other arm free, he strikes his opponent's face. This time, feeling the blow, the wall wonders what the hell had happened. After that, he notices a quick movement and sees that his opponent had escaped the hold. As he gets up, Demoto comments that he finally understood what had happened. Then he states that Aikido had broken his own arm on purpose. Demoto explains that before he could break the boy's arm, Aikido did it himself to increase his range of motion and punch him with his left fist. Madoka is surprised to see this, and Kasumi becomes irritated. She orders her subordinate to stop playing immediately, and now standing, the wall responds that he would do what she wanted. The man reveals that now Aikido's right arm was useless, and the fight would be easier. But without hesitation, our protagonist charges at his opponent, even injured. Demoto immediately concludes that his enemy would attack with the only available hand, which was the left. However, exceeding expectations, Aikido strikes him with his broken arm. This even sends that muscular man flying backward. And our protagonist, facing all the pain, shows no expression. While Kasumi grows increasingly furious, Madoka prays for her prince to win that fight. The protagonist then questions why Demoto said that his broken arm would be useless since apparently it was working fine. After the punch, the blonde Demoto crashes to the injured ground. Furious at seeing this scene, Kasumi asks the wall to stop playing and not to be pushed by someone with a broken arm. As he gets up, the bully thinks that throwing wouldn't work on Aikido. Moreover, apparently key locks wouldn't be effective either because even if he broke all the limbs of that guy, Aikido would keep getting up. Unexpectedly, the wall simply says that it gives up. Upon hearing that, our protagonist becomes restless. Thus, Demoto extends his hand to greet the crazy person in front of him. Seeing this, the idiot Aikido claims that Demoto was surprisingly honest. However, he quickly realizes that the guy was again trying to grab his collarbone. Because of this, Aikido steps back, but Demoto laughs as if that was all he wanted. With a secure blow, he punches Aikido in the face before the boy can react. Our protagonist, after taking that hook, feels a bit dazed. The Yakuza claims he was planning to defeat Aikido using only judo, but to survive in that world, having other techniques gave you an advantage. At that moment, he lands a kick squarely in Aikido's stomach, causing the young man to be dragged back a few meters. Before he can understand what happened, Demoto grabs his opponent's broken arm. He lifts Aikido as if he were raising a piece of paper and prepares to throw the boy to the ground. To complete the cruelty, Demoto hits Aikido against the table to add various drinks on it. Immediately, Madoka panics seeing Aikido getting beaten and screams his name. Kujiro starts laughing and explains that Demoto's specialty, the shoulder throw with the arm, was an incredible skill. And finally, the fight was over. Like the psychopath she was, she turns to Madoka and questions why the girl was so sad. With a crazy look on her face, she asks if Madoka had any hope. The young girl is in complete trance, not believing that her only hope had been defeated. Kujiro is not satisfied and then grabs Madoka's hair, asking her to come over and see clearly. Kasumi forces Madoka to see Aikido's defeated body and asks if she really thought that kid would defeat Demoto or if she expected that young man to save her. Squeezing Madoka's head, Kasumi questions whether the girl really still didn't understand that there was no happy ending in her life. Akiko, on the other hand, was unconscious on the ground, unresponsive. Demoto approaches the boy, celebrating that he had finally passed out, and then states that his defeat had been decided a long time ago. Since the moment Akihito let his guard down thinking that he only knew judo was when his victory had been decided. However, suddenly the blonde reacts, grabbing his opponent's arm, who's caught off guard. Bawal is confused since that boy should be completely unconscious. However, our protagonist smiles, which scares the Yakuza. Even so, he shouts that all Aikido could do was punch, and he wouldn't lose to someone so pathetic. But suddenly, the muscular man feels his body being moved. Our protagonist places his opponent's arm over his shoulder and prepares to execute a throw. With a lunatic's gaze, Aikido simply shouts that he could do this even with one hand. The Yakuza realizes that his enemy was literally using his technique on him. Madoka is extremely surprised, and along with her, Kujo wonders how that kid had such incredible strength. Using Demono's words against him, Aikido states that the old man lost the moment he thought he didn't know judo. Looking ahead, Demono immediately realizes that the lunatic was planning to throw him out the window. In his mind, the Yakuza thinks he wouldn't let that young man win easily, and if he prepared and shifted his center of gravity, he would resist Aikido's incredible strength. However, as he steps on the ground, the young man slips on a bit of soap. Immediately, the big guy turns around, questioning what the hell that was under his feet until he sees some soap tubes scattered on the floor. The man realizes that Aikido did this when he was thrown against the shelf. With no choices left, Demono grabs Aikido's shoulder and furious, the Yakuza states that in that case, he would take the blonde with him. However, that kid just starts laughing with a psychopathic grin. The ex-convict comments that this was obvious because that was the plan. Demono and the two girls in the room are shocked to see this. Our protagonist begins to run towards the window, executing the throw on his opponent while saying that he was already planning to include himself anyway. While shouting the name of his new technique, which was the shoulder throw, Aikido jumps out of the window along with his opponent. Immediately, Madoka runs to the window, shouting for Aikido. The boy, still smiling as he falls, simply says he will be back soon. At that moment, he and Demono fall into a pool, avoiding being killed. Kasumi also rushes to the window, shouting for her bodyguard. Upon closer inspection, she realizes that the man is unconscious in the pool. But not only that, he literally has a fish in his mouth. Seeing that scene, the girl is simply incredulous. She can't believe she has really just lost. In her mind, the delinquent questions whether she could really be in trouble. At that moment, she makes a decision and starts to flee towards the door until Madoka notices. As she clings to Kasumi, Madoka asserts that she will not let her escape. But irritated, the delinquent questions what the hell that girl is doing. Without mercy, Kujo begins to strike her enemy's head while ordering her to let go of her now. Madoka, having her wig pulled off, shows she is quite determined, saying she won't let Kujo leave until Aikido returns, which makes the spoiled girl even angrier. However, something startles her as Aikido appears right in front of her. The blonde, being the crazy person he is, starts to let out some giggles. With no way out, Kujo kneels, apologizing to Aikido and asking to be forgiven. Still, the boy is blunt and simply denies her request while keeping a smile on his face. Kasumi doesn't give up, starting to say she would give him all the money that Aikido wanted. Once again, the boy just denies it. With no options left, Madoka states that she would let him grow up her spheres. This time, the delinquent feels tempted and asks if she is serious. Seeing that this plan might work, Kasumi takes off her shirt, saying he could caress them whenever he wanted. At that moment, Aikido approaches the girl, seeming to have fallen for her trick. Madoka, on the other hand, is incredulous, refusing to believe that Aikido was really doing that. While taking off her shirt, Kujo reveals she has a screwdriver in her hand. She prepares to attack our protagonist, catching him off guard. Immediately, the girl has a fit, charging at Aikido and ordering him to die. However, the boy easily dodges the blow as he learned in boxing, which leaves Kasumi scared. Before she even understands, a straight punch hits her face. Immediately, the wretched girl is thrown away, her mouth bleeding. With just one punch, Aikido knocks that girl out. Sad and looking at his hand, the blonde bids farewell to his youth. Elsewhere, we see someone holding some papers about the Kujos, and Fuyumi reports that this was the summary of the second school. According to the report, the daughter of the president of the Kujo group turned herself in and confessed her crimes, not to mention the other delinquents who were disciplined. Because of this, he states that he acknowledges the results, but Fuyumi still had to ensure that this project does not become a stain on the special education department. Sometime later, we see the pink-haired girl leaving the building. Suddenly, a cell phone appears next to her, as if someone wanted to take a picture of her. We then see a boy with white hair taking a picture of Zetsu. The girl immediately notices and immobilizes the man, snatching the cell phone from his hand. As a result, the boy starts screaming in pain, saying he gives up and that it was him. After releasing her enemy, Fuyumi realizes he was Director Sakaki. Sometime later, we see the two in a sort of cafe. Sakaki comments that Fuyumi dealt with the delinquent school and now with the Kujo group, mentioning that the girl was handling problems that even they couldn't solve. However, the girl simply responds that honestly, even she was surprised, since she never expected Aikido-kun to achieve such results, and looking at his cell phone, the man states that that function was indeed convenient, as the app could numerically determine if a person was bad and how bad they were just by scanning someone. Fuyumi explains that the points assigned by the special education department identified delinquents through facial recognition. Upon hearing this, Sakaki realizes that the program calculating those points was the government's surveillance program. Sakaki explains that through surveillance cameras across the country, they monitor the lives of citizens. However, despite this, the public had no way of knowing about the existence of such a system. And it was clear that they also did not know about the government implementing educational policies in secret or about the existence of the special education department. Sakaki adds that, in any case, he was happy that things were going well now. Meanwhile, He asks Zetsu what she would do if the project failed. The girl, confident in her decision, states that she would simply take full responsibility. This makes the director happy, as he mentions that Fuyumi had more courage than most young people, and he questions whether she had already decided which school would be next. The girl replies that yes, and that school was Seikyo. Sakaki, upon hearing that name, becomes curious and asks if that shouldn't be the school with the strictest discipline in Japan. Fuyumi confirms but retorts that, in fact, there were some concerning rumors about it. Sometime later, we find ourselves in front of the school that Aikido had been attending in recent days. Shyly, Madoka asks if Aikido was already leaving and boasting. The blonde replies that the transferred and condemned student was busy. The girl, red as a tomato, simply responds that she understood. Our protagonist, looking at her, smiles and says that they should exchange contact information. Even shyly, the young girl agrees and gives her number to Akito, who quickly saves it. The blonde asks Madoka to contact him immediately if she had any problems, as if that happened, he would transfer her to another school immediately and help her. Upon hearing this, a few tears escape from the girl's blue eyes. She agrees and soon says goodbye to the new friend she had made. Time passes and night falls over Fuyumi's apartment. In the dining room, the protagonist asks how many points he had received this time, and he begins to add it to what they had earned at the previous school. Fuyumi replies that it was 710 points, about 2 years' worth, and happily the blonde celebrates, saying that this was amazing. The pink-haired girl asks Akito to keep up the good work next time, but the boy interrupts her and calls her. Akito says he realized something at this school, as it was really important to connect with people. This leaves Zetsu confused and surprised. The protagonist continues explaining that he was judging by appearances without really knowing the person, and in both Kasumi and Madoka's cases, he ended up judging them wrongly. Fuyumi promptly responds that she understands, and therefore the boy should reflect on this and what they should do next. Akito, already knowing what he should respond, states that he should listen carefully and then think about it, and once again, Fuyumi congratulates him. She also mentions that she hoped the boy could apply what he learned at the next school, and the two continue talking, but finally the day passes. As he walks toward the new school, Aikido thinks that the new place must be right in front. However, upon arriving in front of the school, the boy is surprised by something. He sees 3 extremely proper boys standing in military posture. The young men stare at him with an extremely serious expression. Confused, the protagonist wonders what the hell those crazy guys were doing. Suddenly, another proper boy appears at his side and catches Aikido's attention. Furious, the proper boy asks the blonde what was wrong with his head. Our protagonist replies that his head wasn't that good. However, before he could continue speaking, the crazy boy grabs his hair. Fuming with rage, the nerd says he was asking what color that hair was since it wasn't allowed, ordering Aikido to take off his collar as well. Another proper boy arrives, shouting that he didn't recognize Aikido's face and therefore he should state its class and student number, but the young man responds that he had no way of knowing. Since he was a transferred and condemned student and irritated by that, the slick-haired boy pushes the protagonist, stating that he didn't care whether he was a transferred student or not. Fed up with this, the blonde adopts a boxing stance, hitting his opponent with a punch to the face. Seeing Akito do this, the other proper boys freeze, unable to believe the audacity of that transferred student. Thus, the ex-convict states that he only hit back because he was hit first. The slick-haired boy, on the other hand, becomes simply furious, questioning whether Aikido had any idea who he had just laid hands on. However, the blonde simply replies that he had no idea who he was. The crazy boy asks if Aikido wasn't seeing the armband he was wearing since he was from the school's disciplinary committee, and they were the Stars of Hope, who cut through evil and protected everyone's school life, and Akihito continues confused, responding that he really didn't know who he was. The slick-haired boy continues saying that the blonde had already violated 3 school rules, but immediately the protagonist tries to explain that he only hit him because he was attacked first. However, the young man from the disciplinary committee wasn't much for conversation, and soon Akito is surrounded by several students. In his mind, the protagonist thinks that Fuyumi would probably be angry with him again, but he really had no choice. Suddenly, a boy appears questioning what had happened. Just by his presence, he makes all the other guys from the disciplinary committee stop. Immediately, they all seem to sound cold, and the boy who had been attacked by Aikido bows. The slick-haired boy calls that kid the president of the committee. Akihito, who was already lost in the situation, becomes even more confused by this. As he walks past all his bowing subordinates, the committee president questions whether any rules had been broken. Promptly, the slick-haired boy responds that 3 rules have been broken, and while drawing his wooden katana from its sheath, the president simply replies that he understood. Seeing this, the protagonist wonders why that guy had a wooden sword. At that moment, the committee president assumes his stance. Before Aikido could think about it, the boy charges at him. Quickly, the president manages to strike our protagonist's chest with his sword. This leaves the blonde confused, not understanding anything. On the other hand, the crazy guy claims he will execute justice. The blow sends Aikido flying away. Akihito falls to the ground, still surprised by everything that was happening, and so he questions what the hell the committee president was doing all of a sudden. The boy, on the other hand, grabs a lock of Aikido's hair and starts smelling it. He claims there was no smell of bleach and that was Aikido's natural hair, and furious, the blonde turns around, responding that that was what he was trying to say. The president also asks Aikido what that collar was, and the blonde replies that he really didn't know but was forced to wear it. Thus, the president orders the blonde to take it off. However, he responds that it was impossible. He explains that if he took it off, he would literally explode. For some reason, the boy quickly believes that, which leaves one of his subordinates confused, who tells Shiba that that guy used violence against the disciplinary committee. But Shiba responds that he did that since he was attacked for breaking some rule, even though he hadn't done so, and therefore his subordinate should be more careful in the future. Shiba calls again for the transfer student, who introduces himself as Akihito, and then the president asks the boy to keep the buttons of his shirt closed. Then Shiba announces that it was almost time for the morning assembly, and so everyone should return to their classrooms. Immediately, the council members comply with their lord's order. Akihito, on the other hand, thinks that guy was crazy but didn't seem to be bad. Sometime later, we go to one of the classrooms in that school. Akihito, lying on his desk, thinks that he was already tired even though it was still morning. He notices that next to him, that slick-haired guy was also there. Suddenly, a voice echoes through the speakers. Immediately, all the students stand up upon hearing that it was the morning assembly. Confused, our protagonist looks around, not really knowing what he should do. Angrily, the slick-haired boy grabs Akihito's ear, questioning why he was looking around and ordering him to stand up. A council member questions what Article 1 was. Immediately, all the students respond in unison that it was about respecting the basic human rights of individuals and groups and protecting their freedom and dignity. Again, the member asks what the article was, and so everyone responds that it was to strive to oppose error and justice and eliminate their sources. Being mean, the slick-haired boy questions the transfer student what Article 3 was, and confused, Aikido simply responds that it was something about increasing courage. Furious, the boy slams the blonde's face into his own desk while stating that the only thing that was increasing was his stupidity. Time passes, and the torturous class continues. Tired of just listening, Aikido starts to doze off unintentionally until again the crazy one decides to punish him with justice. It hits the blonde's head with a piece of wood while ordering the young man not to sleep in class. Placing the object on Aikido's back, the boy also orders him not to bend over, keeping it at a 90-degree angle. Thus, the class continues with a lot of justice being applied to the poor transfer student. Sometime later, the class had ended and the students were calmly chatting in the classroom. Stretching, the blonde states that it was finally lunchtime. As he takes his lunchbox out of his bag, the boy wonders what Fuyumi had made for him today. Upon opening his bento, he realizes it was a hamburger steak, which leaves the boy salivating. Meanwhile, that unbearable committee member appears again, throwing the poor lunchbox up and calling Aikido an idiot. The blonde sacrifices himself by throwing himself on the ground to save his lunch. Furious, he questions what the slick-haired guy was doing, and the annoying one replies that Aikido's meal was very high in sodium, and the boy was crazy about eating it. The guy also explains that the school offered a school lunch, and if Aikido wanted something delicious, he should eat that, and upon hearing this, the boy is tempted. However, sometime later, we see the young man staring at a sad and extremely bland meal. He asks what the hell that was, and the annoying one replies that it was a complete nutritional food formulated by a nutritionist, and with that, Aikido's health would be guaranteed. The guy also asks Aikido to drink that along with a special green juice, putting the bottle to the blonde's mouth. As he drinks this extremely bad liquid, our protagonist starts to faint and vomit. Once again, the slick-haired guy proves to be unbearable and asks why Aikido was vomiting, then orders the boy to crawl on his knees and hit himself. Finally, the school day ends and the sunset appears in the sky. Grumbling while walking outside, Aikido states that the juice still tastes bitter, and then he questions what was wrong with the school. After all, they only care about rules, but at that moment, he comes across a case of bullying where a brown-haired boy was attacking another nerd. After beating up the delinquent, the protagonist complains that he only gained 4 points. However, suddenly Shiba appears behind him, calling out to him. Startled, the blonde turns around, realizing who he was. The council president, looking at the beaten boy, asks if it was Akihito who did this. The blonde tries to explain while asking not to be hit again with a wooden sword. However, surprising him, Shiba merely comments that this was excellent. The psychopath states that punishing evil is noble justice, and his first impression of Aikido was terrible, but apparently, he had been mistaken. Then Shiba asks if Aikido would lend him some of his strength. Extending his hand to shake the blondes, Shiba comments that they would save that school together. In his head, the idiot thinks that saving the school meant he could earn points, and Fuyumi had told him to do good things too. So he greets his new ally, and the president promptly responds that he is happy to hear that. The boy adds that it was already time to go home and that Aikido should leave before it got late, and thus the blonde says goodbye to his new colleague. Revealing his true face, Shiba turns around, striking the boy who was already on the ground with his sword. As he hits that student several times, the president states that it was already the 3rd time he had to discipline the idiot. The crazy guy even claims that trash never learns, no matter how many times he says it, and even with the student begging for forgiveness, he does not stop. Now delivering a powerful blow, the president ends up drawing a bit of blood from that wretch. Licking the blood from his cheek, the madman declares that he would destroy evil. The next day at the school Aikido was attending, we see that Shiba, for some reason, was having fun while doing something. Next to him, our protagonist was also laughing. It is revealed that in fact the two were beating up various bullies. Shiba approaches a boy who was hiding and states that he didn't need to worry since everything was fine. The committee president extends his hand to the cowering student and warns that as long as he is there, justice will never die. The nerd, upon hearing that, is impressed and thanks his savior. Shiba asks the nerd to try to live under the supervision of the school committee from now on, as that way the delinquents wouldn't be able to lay a hand on him, and the boy agrees. Then the boy also orders two of his minions to take that nerd to the infirmary, and so the two comply. While messing with his hair, Shiba declares that this was another brilliant execution of justice. Akihiko, staring at his new friend, thinks that he was the president of the Public Morals Committee, Seichiro Shiba. The blonde thinks that his first impression of him was terrible, but it turns out that Shiba was actually a good guy. But remembering his goal, the protagonist pulls out his phone and starts analyzing the bullies he had defeated. After a while, he calculates how many points he had earned. Suddenly, his new friend approaches and asks Akihiko what that was. Our protagonist begins to explain that when you held that part of the app, you could see the villain points of the person. Upon seeing that, Seichiro seems extremely surprised and excited. He immediately takes the protagonist's cell phone. Next, the boy explains that he would confiscate it since the possession of smartphones was prohibited by the school's rules. Before Aikido could do anything, Seichiro also declares that he has business to attend to and will leave now. Seeing that his smartphone had been taken, the blonde immediately thinks that Fuyumi would be angry with him. In another location, we see the school president's office. Shiba reports to his superior that there were 9 cases of rule violations that week, and it had finally dropped to a single digit. The bald man sitting in the chair congratulates Shiba, saying he did a very good job. He comments that before the boy arrived, that school was known as one of the worst due to delinquents, but now it was recognized as one of the best. Feeling honored, Seichiro thanks him, but then says he has something to ask the principal. Then the young man inquires who exactly Akito, the transfer student, was. The principal reveals that even he did not know the details. This leaves Shiba extremely confused since the principal was the highest authority in that school. The bald man then explains that he heard the transfer student was actually a government agent. Upon hearing that, Shiba seems thoughtful but responds that it clarified a lot, thanking the principal afterward. After that, Seichiro pulls out some papers and reveals that the main reason for his visit was to present a document for a proposal. The principal responds that if it were up to him, he would gladly settle anything and begins to read the paper Shiba handed him. However, upon seeing what was written, this leaves the man completely shocked. We then see that Seichiro planned to dictate what each student would do every second that passed. The crazy guy reveals that from now on, he planned to control the student's behavior every second, and this was the plan for implementing justice. Since if this were carried out, the public morality of that school would never be broken again, the principal questions Shiba if he didn't think that was a bit too much. Sighing, Seichiro responds that he understood while pulling Aikido's cell phone from his pocket. With a frightening expression, he takes a picture of the principal in front of him. Seeing that, the bald man becomes confused and asks what the hell his student was doing. Staring at the cell phone screen, Seichiro notices that the principal had a number of points above his head. Reading the principal's information, Shiba declares that the man embezzled school funds and harassed some students, and according to the app, he was malicious. Extremely confused, the bald man questions how the hell that student knew this. Ignoring that question, Shiba asks the man to listen to him and simply says that the president needed to sign that paper and you wouldn't have to do anything else. Seichiro also asserts that this would improve the school's reputation, and that was all the principal wanted. Smiling like a madman, the boy states that he would take his leave now. As he walks, the young man continues analyzing Aikido's cell phone. We see that in one part of the app, it was asking for a password. In his head, the boy comments that everything except that function was blocked. But that was fine because he would expose everything for the sake of his plan. At a dinner with Aikido, Fuyumi asks if those guys from the Public Morality Committee were really trustworthy. Aikido replies that he thought they were suspicious at first, but apparently they were making an effort to improve the school, so probably yes. However, outraged, the blonde declares that he wished that school would at least change the food, and Fuyumi simply responds that she understands. Seitsu says that for now he should continue investigating a bit more, and the young man promptly agrees. Another day at school, Aikido starts looking at his schedule. The first part is that he should inspect some bags. Next, his duty was to eat his bento hidden so that no one would see him doing it. Finally, he was supposed to beat up some mean guys, and that was actually quite good. Sometime later, classes finally end and the students begin to leave. As he descends the stairs next to Shiba, Aikido comments that he was exhausted. Seichiro responds that thanks to Aikido, the public morality of that school improved even more than before. With a smile on his face, the young man says he was really grateful, and it just took one more step for him to have the ideal school he always dreamed of. Feeling proud, the blonde comments that of course he would help improve the school. Then Aikido mentions that he was actually a transfer student and a criminal. Upon hearing that, Shiba is shocked for a moment. Other young people who were already down on the stairs ask their friend Takashi to hurry up and come down too. The boy starts to descend the stairs quickly while asking his friends not to leave him behind. The other two urge Takashi to speed up because they were in a hurry. As the young man descended the stairs quickly with a smile on his face, he says he was on his way. For some reason, when looking to the side, Shiba becomes extremely furious. In the blink of an eye, he brings his foot to Takashi's back, pushing the boy down the stairs. This leaves even Aikido confused, who does not understand why his friend did that. Poor Takashi falls down the stairs, injuring his knee in the process. The boy's friends run towards him to check if he is okay and what happened. Extremely confused, Aikido asks his friend what the hell he was doing. On the other hand, Seiichiro maintains a maniacal expression. Immediately, Aikido descends the stairs to reach Takashi and asks if he is okay. The blonde extends his hand to the fallen colleague and then asks if he can stand up. However, Shiba approaches from behind, striking the boy's shoulder and lowering his hand. Akihito immediately turns around and asks what he is doing. Like the crazy person he is, Seiichiro questions why the hell Akihito was extending his hand to the evil, asserting that in doing so, he would be contaminated. Without a drop of remorse, the young man approaches the fallen Takashi and starts to step on him. Akihito tries to explain that Takashi just jumped a few steps on the stairs and everyone does that. Shiba, with his distorted vision, responds that exactly everyone does that and such things are common. Like crossing the street on a red light when no one is watching or continuing to watch content knowing it was sent legally. Everyone feels guilty but uses excuses to justify themselves. And the result of this is evil dominating the whole world through small actions. Shiba asserts that the accumulation of what people call things that everyone does is what creates evil in that world. Akiko replies that this may even be true, but it is still too cruel. As Takashi tries to get up, Shiba begins to take Akiko's phone from his pocket. He analyzes it with an app and sees that the boy he had pushed down had no points of evil. Seeing this, Seiichiro claims that the government's prototype is useless. Akiko, seeing his phone being misused, asks Shiba to return it, but the boy retorts that he already said that it was against the school's rules. The blonde comments that this meant Shiba also couldn't use the device, and the boy replies that he understands and that Akihito really had a point. Then the crazy guy throws the phone on the ground and starts stepping on it. Seeing this, the blonde is in shock, and Seiichiro then asks if it was better this way. The young man begins to say that soon that school will be reborn and his plan for executing justice will finally begin. After saying all this, Shiba also asks Akihito to eagerly await it. Holding his broken phone, the protagonist thinks that he really couldn't understand that boy, questioning what the hell this plan for executing justice was. Then finally a day passes. While running, Akihito thinks he's going to be late since he spent too much time having breakfast. In his mind, he asserts that at this rate, Shiba would get mad at him, and that was very problematic, so he definitely didn't want that to happen. At the school gate, one of the committee boys was looking at his watch. After passing by him, Akihito thinks he barely made it on time. However, when he opens his eyes, he sees an impressive sight. For some reason, our protagonist finds various council members humiliating and beating other students. In his mind, he asserts that somehow the atmosphere was bad, and at that moment, another nerd crosses the school gate while thinking he almost got late. However, a council member seeing his watch realizes something else. Immediately, he punches the poor nerd in the face. As he throws the poor boy away, the council member starts saying that he was late. While beating him on the ground, the guy states that the nerd was 0.1 second late, then asks if he was crazy. Seeing that shocking scene, even Akihito, a former convict, is confused. Another council member asks one of the students what kind of uniform that was and starts to choke the boy with his own tie. Nearby, a girl was also attacking another, claiming that her skirt was 2 millimeters too short and that she should pull her skirt down. Shiba at that moment arrives, stating that it was a magnificent view. Akihito, startled by everything he saw, asked his friend if the punishments weren't worse than before. However, the crazy one with the distorted vision responds that they weren't and that, in fact, they had just been very patient until now. After that, the crazy one turns around, noticing something strange. He points to a young girl and asks if the girl's hair was dyed. She replies that it wasn't because she had already been warned about it before, and that's why she dyed it black now. Akihito simply tells Shiba that the girl was right, and that's why everything was fine. However, the maniac walks over to a bucket of water. Confused, our protagonist asks what the hell his colleague was doing. Seiichiro mercilessly approaches and puts the girl's head in the bucket. He starts washing her hair and drowning her in the process without any pity. While committing that act, the young man states that 2 strands of the girl's hair had not been dyed and she needed to dye them properly. Our protagonist approaches, telling the boy that he was going too far. Upon hearing that, Seiichiro asks his colleague if he had forgotten what they talked about. Thus, the president simply states that this was the act of correcting evil. For that reason, the young man asks Akihito if what he was doing was wrong. Our protagonist is confused and simply replies that no, but he still felt something strange. Upon receiving the answer he wanted, Shiba approaches Akihito and states that all he needed to do was silently observe him, as that was true justice. We see that around them, several members of the disciplinary committee were punishing students who made small mistakes with aggression. In light of this, our protagonist is momentarily left without reaction. Seeing everything that was happening around him, he doesn't know what to do. Clenching his fists, the boy wonders what the hell justice was since he didn't understand. That same night, Akihito seems sad at the dinner table, barely touching his food. Fuyumi, finding this behavior strange, tells Akihito that he was hardly eating and that the food would get cold. Even so, the young man seems indifferent and doesn't respond at all. Confused, the girl asks Akihito why he was like this, and if something had happened at school. Downcast, our protagonist questions her about what justice was. This question leaves the girl surprised, and she asks back where that came from and if he was feeling okay. Aikido reveals that he was like this because of Shiba, as the boy was punishing students who did bad things. However, he states that he thought the method of punishment was a bit excessive. The ex-convict also comments that he really didn't understand this, but something about what was happening was irritating him. Fuyumi, upon hearing that, seems thoughtful for a moment. She then reveals that there is no answer that everyone can agree on, as right and wrong depend on each person's values, so in the end, justice was just ego. In other words, what you believe to be right is justice. This revelation leaves the blonde truly contemplative. As she stands up, the girl with pink hair comments that the same applies to that project of the transferred criminal student. Seizu explains that of course there are people who say that this project is wrong. However, she believed in Akihito and believed that the boy could change the schools for the better. After all, he had already proven that he was capable of that, so several flashbacks of the schools he attended come to the boy's mind. Our protagonist pauses for a moment, truly at a loss for words, just remembering what happened. Gently stroking his head, Fuyumi declares that he should believe in that too and believe in his own idea of what is right. Hearing this, the blonde seems happy and thanks Zetsu for that. We then move to another location in that city. In a house with traditional Japanese patterns, a room was lit. Inside, Shiba was in front of a sword while a mural reading justice was behind him. The boy stares at the blade of the katana, somewhat thoughtful. After that, he wields it for a moment. Performing some movements with the blade, Shiba declares that all of this is for the sake of justice. The next day at school, one of the committee members asks for everyone's attention. It is possible to see that all the students were lined up side by side, organized and with a military posture. The council member declares that they will now begin the school assembly. At that moment, another student from the council requests the presence of the class president on the podium. Shiba, with his wooden sword by his side, steps up with perfect posture. The young man shouts for justice, and then orders everyone to recite aloud what he commands. The students, just hearing that, begin to tremble with fear and remember their past aggressions. But ignoring this, Shiba continues asking them to cite Article 1. Everyone repeats in unison that Article 1 was about respecting the fundamental human rights of individuals and groups and protecting their freedom and dignity. Like a dictator, the boy continues asking them to recite Article 2. So they all do, reciting that it was to fight against injustice and evil and strive to eliminate its cause and root. The boy does not stop asking them to recite Article 3. The students declare that it was to eliminate discrimination based on race, gender, religion, or sexual orientation, providing diversity and inclusion. Shiba is satisfied hearing this and says that from that day on, the plan for the application of justice will begin and everyone should follow the orders of the disciplinary committee. He mentions that after checking the luggage, measuring the uniforms, and haircuts, they would proceed according to the designated schedule. The students listening to that speech continue trembling with fear. Suddenly, a voice emerges questioning Shiba about what he thinks he is doing, which leaves the boy startled. In front of him, Aikido appears, driving a council member by the hair. Our protagonist apologizes to Seichiro and states that he is late. At that moment, another council member lunges to attack Aikido, declaring that he cannot lay a hand on a disciplinary agent and expect to get away unscathed. However, immediately the blonde reacts, knocking out his opponent. Surprised by this, Seichiro asks what Aikido was thinking, also questioning if he realized how important that day was. While warming up, Aikido walks towards Shiba, saying that he arrived late and became violent, asking his friend what he was going to do. Shiba says that normally this would be a serious offense, but Aikido always embodied his ideal version of justice, and if the boy apologized, he would overlook it this time. The blonde, on the other hand, quietly says that just as Fuyumi-chan said, he was going to do it. At that moment, he tells Shiba Seichiro that right there and then he would knock out the boy. This leaves the young man with black hair quite surprised to see his ally challenge him. That awakens Shiba's fury, causing several veins to appear on his face. On the other hand, the protagonist asserts that he is sure there are people who think Shiba's way of acting is right. However, he believes the boy is being excessive. And so, Aikido proposes that they resolve this to find out whose way is the stronger right. Touching his hair, Seichiro says that it is a pity since he really thought they could understand each other. But smiling maniacally, the boy agrees with Aikido's proposal. As he jumps off the podium, the young man declares that justice never loses to evil. Thus, he begins to draw his katana, showing that it was no longer the wooden one. Akihito, also being the crazy one he is, says that this is indeed how he liked to resolve things. On the other hand, Shiba maintains his attack pose, holding the blade of his sword. He asserts that in the name of justice, he will judge his colleague. Assuming his boxing stance, the blonde simply asks the man of justice to do so. The two ex-friends stand face to face. Shiba, still in his swordsman stance, asserts that in the name of justice, he will judge Aikido. The blonde in his boxing stance calls his ex-friend the man of justice and asks them to start already. One of the teachers questions if that sword is real, and the professor next to her responds that if it were, it would be a violation of the law on the control of firearms and bladed weapons. However, quickly a council member strikes that poor man, stating that speaking was strictly prohibited. The young man asserts that whether he is a teacher or not, those who break the rules will be punished. However, before he could continue speaking, the boy is quickly hit by a punch from Akihito. Mocking his face, Akihito states that he did that because he also broke the rule of silence. The council member, being intimidated, becomes quite irritated. He charges at the transferred student to punish him. However, the president of the student council raises his sword, ordering his vassal to stop that. Shiba comments that he would not be able to handle Akihito and therefore who will judge the boy will be him. Upon hearing this, the council member becomes extremely confused, but does not dare to contradict the president's order. Stichiro tells Akihito that he should not commit more crimes or the sentence would be worse. At that moment, he presses the tip of the sword against the neck of the ex-convict. Our protagonist seems to become confused and then questions if he could ask something. Shiba, misunderstanding, inquires if his opponent was ready to surrender and accept the punishment. However, trembling, our protagonist points to the sword, claiming it was extremely cool. Because of this, everyone around becomes extremely confused by the situation. Confused, Shiba says he really didn't understand since Akihito could appreciate the beauty of that sword, but still insisted on denying his justice. Therefore, he attempts to strike the protagonist, who narrowly dodges downward. The boy pursues, attacking Akihito, and begins to say that he was the executor of justice for the good of all. The maniac even comments that he was eliminating the evil that was Akihito for the good of everyone. While running for his life, the blonde starts to plead for his ex-friend to stop for a moment. However, without mercy, the lunatic attacks once more, slicing through tables and throwing books and objects in all directions, forcing Akihito to jump inside the school. Sighing after narrowly escaping the blow, the protagonist calls his opponent a bastard. Looking to the side, he sees one of the objects that had flown and realizes it was perfect. At that moment, Shiba was waiting for his opponent outside the school until he noticed something. Suddenly, Akihito appears, attacking the boy with an umbrella. The ex-convict starts to laugh while wielding the object. With a crazy smile, he claims that this was Akihito's special sword. Trying to maintain his perfect posture, Shiba says that his enemy has a very vulgar fighting style, which raises the blonde's fury. At that same moment, the two boys stare at each other for a while. Shiba sighs, saying he was very underestimated. He prepares to execute a strike, calling it the Sword of Justice Slash. Akihito, on the other hand, begins to laugh, thinking it would be meaningless. However, he sees the image of Shiba cutting off his head. Our protagonist wonders what the hell the image is and realizes that the strike was already approaching him. In the blink of an eye, the boy manages to dodge backward, realizing that it was life passing before his eyes. The young man, as crazy as he was, opens the umbrella, claiming it was his barrier. However, it is easily sliced by Shiba, who calls it ridiculous. The same strike that cut the umbrella inflicts a wound on the blonde's chest. Seeing that with one blow Shiba cut the umbrella and hit him, our protagonist realizes that his sword technique was indeed impressive. On the other hand, Seichiro tries to attack his opponent once more while saying that all evil must bow before justice. And confused, Akihito questions why the boy was so obsessed with rules, to which Shiba responds that he doesn't need a reason to do the right thing. The protagonist doesn't give up and asserts that the boy was really going too far. After saying that, he gives Shiba a small shove. After the shove, he starts to run, ordering his opponent to get out of his way. Akihito grabs two branches he sees in front of him. While assuming a funny stance, he prepares to jump. This surprises even Seichiro, who is caught off guard. Then, in the blink of an eye, Akihito leaps toward his opponent to attack him. He tries to strike Shiba, who ends up dodging backward. However, his uniform gets torn and a superhero card falls from his pocket. Upon realizing that his uniform had torn and his special card had fallen, Shiba is in shock. Our protagonist quickly moves toward the object, picking it up and questioning what the hell it was. However, furious at seeing the scene, Seichiro shouts for Akihito to give it back to him. Literally fuming with rage, the well-dressed boy orders once again for Akihito to return it quickly. Mocking this, the ex-convict questions if that was Shiba's and if it wasn't against the school rules. But ignoring that question, the maniac tells Akihito not to touch it with his dirty hands. And with his eyes filled with hatred, he comments that it was his. In a flashback, we see Seichiro watching something on TV. And looking at that card, he comments that it was the Medal of Justice. In a flashback, Shiba explains that he had few friends since childhood, and when he got home, he only watched anime. And that was when he found the hero of justice he admired so much. In the cartoon Shiba was watching, a teddy bear was holding a bomb while threatening to redo that city. Until the man of justice appears, ordering the villain to stop causing destruction. The little bear shouts that he wasn't doing anything wrong and that he just wanted to build a more livable city for everyone. However, the man of justice ignores him, simply stating that he would cut out the evil and in the name of justice would judge him. Then the hero used the sword of justice, cutting, defeating, and launching his enemy into the skies. The villain ends up exploding with his own bomb in the sky. Suddenly, a little cat appears, thanking the man of justice, who simply replies that he did all this because her eyes were asking for help. Seeing this, Shiba is extremely impressed. Excited, he shouts that this was really cool and explains that from that moment on, the Vigilant became his idol. Sometime later, we see some people walking calmly down the street. While humming the Vigilant's song, Shiba walks normally. However, the young man hears a girl behind him shouting that there is a purse snatcher. The delinquent, after stealing the poor woman's belongings, runs away to escape. He starts running towards Shiba, who seems paralyzed by the situation. The angry thug orders Shiba to get out of his way or he would kill him. Desperate, Seichiro begins to cry, thinking that he needed to run away quickly. But at that moment, he remembers his hero, the Vigilant, who said he would cut out evil in the name of justice. This seems to bring the boy back to reality, but in a more courageous way. Even while watching the huge thief advance towards him, he declares that in the name of justice, he would judge him, and for that, the young man prepares a punch. At that moment, the boy lands a solid hit on the thug's chin. Because it was a precise attack, the thief ends up fainting. Then Shiba opens his eyes to see if what he had done had worked. Everyone around sees that a little boy defeated a thief and is impressed. The poor little boy couldn't believe what he had just done. At the boy's school, one of his friends shouts, questioning if he really caught a purse snatcher. We see that the boy received a letter from his favorite hero and another thank you note. All of his classmates start congratulating him, saying that it was incredible and that Shiba was the hero of justice in their class. Upon hearing that he was a hero and looking at the vigilant's letter, the boy feels very happy. He explains that he was praised by the police and became popular in class, and everyone in the classroom was smiling, making the atmosphere very comfortable because justice made everyone smile. Shiba also reports that after that, he dedicated himself to helping people at school and around the city, and everything was to see everyone smile until something happened. Then at that moment, we see some students talking, and one of them comments that he heard Shiba took care of some delinquents again. His classmate questions if it was again, since that guy was always helping people. However, they quickly change the subject as if it wasn't that cool anymore. Shiba explains that unlike that time, people stopped praising him. Looking at the letter from his superhero Vigilant, he states that it wasn't enough and he needed more. So he decides to eradicate evil completely. Back to the battle between Akihito and Shiba, the maniac declares that this was his promise of justice. And just like that time, he wants to create a school where everyone can smile, and for that, you cut out evil. Moreover, to protect everyone's smile, he would fight. Akihito then asks why the hell his opponent was talking about smiles. He then states that no one there was smiling. Upon hearing this, the maniac seems to hesitate for a moment. He walks towards his classmates and questions whether everyone should be grateful to him. However, the opposite happens from what he imagined, and all the students turn to him showing sad expressions. Seeing this, the young man wonders why. Seichiro says that this school was finally free of evil, so he questions why those people were making such sad faces. Akihito puts his arm around his opponent and says that just as he had said, maybe it's because evil exists, since the most wicked thing in that school was him. Upon hearing that he was evil, Shiba seems completely shocked. Akihito continues saying that he is truly evil, and in the end, the only thing the boy wanted was to be praised. In this way, Seichiro seems quite offended to hear that. However, the blonde continues and declares that his classmates shouldn't drag everyone into his selfish justice. Tired of this, Shiba takes his stance with his sword and says that he had no intention of listening to the words of evil, also asking Akihito to return his hero's letter. Meanwhile, our protagonist merely holds his two sticks as if they were swords, asking for the battle to begin soon. Once again, the two stare at each other. Shiba grabs his blade while starting to charge his justice sword attack. However, without letting his opponent think too much about it, Akihito charges at him. The two approach each other with their respective weapons. Shiba attempts to strike Akihito near his stomach. Our protagonist was also close to hitting his opponent, but is apparently struck first. With the blow he received, the ex-convict is thrown far away. Thus, the poor blonde flies into the sky as if he had been defeated. Sinning victory, Seichiro declares that justice always wins. Seeing their only ray of hope defeated, all the students are in shock. Fixing his hair, the committee president states that they should now return to the morning assembly. However, Akihito suddenly appears behind him, still with his two sticks. With a maniacal look on his face, he begins to charge his attack to finish that fight. Seichiro turns around in desperation, not believing that his enemy was still standing. But before the young man could think about it, he is struck twice. This tears the disciplinary committee president's armband and makes the justice letter fall once again. As he falls defeated, Seichiro cannot believe that his justice has failed. Akihito stares for a moment at his defeated opponent on the ground. Fallen, Shiba wonders why this happened. Remembering the moment he had apparently defeated Akihito, the young man questions what went wrong. Then we see some math and literature books fall to the ground with some katana marks. As he lifts his shirt, letting those objects fall, Akihito seems happy. With a smile on his face, the young man declares that this was Akihito's super block. Getting up, Shiba realizes that his opponent was using textbooks as a shield and comments that he really had a very vulgar fighting style. Akihito, on the other hand, mocks him, saying that Shiba had never cut a person before since the boy couldn't even differentiate between cutting a book and a human. Somewhat embarrassed, Seichiro retorts that Akihito speaks as if he knew what it was like to cut someone. However, upon hearing that, our protagonist freezes for a moment. In a flashback, we see young Akihito holding a bloody blade. Around him, the bodies of several people are scattered, apparently lifeless. Akihito then declares that back then he didn't understand what was good or bad and was just focused on eating to survive. Hearing this, Seichiro suddenly seems a bit confused. Looking at that transfer student in front of him, he asks who the young man was. Our protagonist then simply responds that he was. However, before he could say what he was, the young man has a flashback of all the schools he had attended up to that moment and everyone he had saved. Thus, he responds that he was a condemned transfer student. Hearing all this, Shiba seems shocked. He lowers his head, simply responding that he understood. Seeing that Shiba turned to leave, Aikido questions where he was going, and the boy merely retorts that he lost him. And because of that, he would have to accept the responsibility for his actions. Thus, he asks for the microphone from one of the student council members, who reluctantly hands it over. In this way, Shiba turns to look at all the students he hurt, and even Aikido is among the crowd, watching attentively to hear what the boy would say. Thus, Sachiro reveals that he used justice to surrender to his sense of superiority, and he ended up doing terrible things to everyone there. As he bows before those he hurt, the young man sincerely apologizes. The students, seeing the dictator apologize, are momentarily in shock. Akihiko, on the other hand, maintains a downcast expression, and Shiba also does not seem happy. However, the furious crowd begins to shout that they would not forgive him since they had suffered too much, and a simple apology would not be enough. Sechuru then continues, saying that he does not expect to be forgiven, and that is why the disciplinary committee will be dissolved from that day on. Suddenly, a stone hits the boy's head, injuring him. A rain of stones begins to fly towards Shiba, and while all the students say that this is not enough, the council members try to protect their master. Shiba, as an act of kindness, declares that they can do whatever they want with him. However, the other committee members were just following his orders. On the other hand, the other committee members, seeing the president try and defend them, become emotional. However, the angry crowd does not stop. As they advance towards the committee members, they assert that Shiba did not know how they felt all this time, and therefore the young man should feel their anger. Akihito, seeing that number of students advance against his friend, becomes desperate. Most of them charge at Saichiro, who is frightened. One of the students strikes the former committee president, who does not react. The crowd gathers and begins to beat the boy, while one of them says that this authoritarian regime has always oppressed them. In fact, school life would be resolved without harm if Shiba disappeared. Another student sees Shiba's favorite hero's letter on the ground. He picks it up, questioning if that was the boy's treasure, and starts to tear it. Saichiro, even while being beaten, tries to shout for the boy to stop. However, he was destined to do so and makes a small tear in the letter, ready to rip it in half. But suddenly, a hand grabs his arm. Akihito, using all his strength to immobilize the boy who did that, orders him to return it to Shiba since it was something important to the boy. The boy who was struck falls to the ground, screaming in pain, while the blonde runs, ordering everyone there to stop kicking Shiba. The protagonist asserts that of course that boy did bad things, but he was reflecting on it, and besides, there must be people who were helped by him. Moreover, the blonde also comments that if those guys laid a hand on Shiba, they would get beaten by him. Thus, the students who witness what Aikido is capable of shrink back and cease their fury. At that moment, our protagonist extends his hand with Shiba's letter, returning it to him. Fallen on the ground, the poor young man with black hair questions why Aikido is doing this since he caused all that. The blonde with a smile on his face replies that it was because the boy's eyes were asking for help. Upon hearing that phrase, Saichiro is in complete shock. He remembers his favorite hero, the Vigilant, repeating that same phrase. The ex-convict continues and comments that he also thought they were similar. Akihito then reveals that he also committed crimes. However, he met someone named Fuyumi who listened to what he had to say, realized he was wrong, and helped him evolve and change. That's why he thought he should become that kind of person for Saichiro. Crying, Shiba asks if Aikido thought he could also start over. The transfer student replies that it totally depends on Shiba and asserts that he is also trying to start over. Upon hearing this, the young man with black hair smiles. Then he extends his hand, taking his letter back and responding that he understands. Outside that school, a girl with pink and black hair was watching the scene. Seeing all that, the girl asserts that this must be Aikido-kun. We then see the blonde trying to calm Shiba, and while sucking on a lollipop, the girl who was just observing from outside thinks that this would be interesting. Sasaki, after the report, cannot believe that the best disciplined school in Japan was under the tyrannical rule of a high school student. The man also comments that the transfer student and convict really did a great job again. Fuyumi remains silent until the man inquires if something is wrong, but the girl replies that it is not. The girl then says that regarding that subject they discussed, however, before she could continue speaking, Sasaki asserts that there is no problem with that. He comments that he made his decision based on the results so far, not to mention that the next school would be too much for Aikido to handle alone. At Fuyumi's place, the young girl tells Aikido that she would dry his hair, and the boy promptly agrees. Next, we see the girl with the hair cooling the boy's hair. The pink-haired girl questions if the young man's injuries were better, and he replies that everything was perfect. Taking off his shirt, he even claims that nothing hurt anymore. Fuyumi, seeing the scar on the boy's chest, asserts that he has an incredible ability to recover since the wound from the Japanese sword had already closed. Laughing and saying that he didn't mean to take off his shirt, the girl thinks that it was still a fact that he got hurt 3 times in a row. Moreover, it was good that the system of transferring convicted students was improving school order, and she was happy to see Aikido grow day by day. But she was a little worried, however. Interrupting the girl, the blonde inquires to Fuyumi what the next school would be. This leaves the girl startled by the sudden question. While putting on his shirt, the boy reports that he has been defeating villains in different schools, and that's why he was thinking he wanted to help more people in trouble. Fuyumi suddenly sighs and replies that maybe she was worrying for nothing, which leaves Aikido confused. She explains that regarding the next school, 2 transferred convicted students would infiltrate the school. Thinking that someone would infiltrate with him, the boy wonders if it would be with Fuyumi. The girl promptly replies that no, in fact, it would be another person accompanying Aikido. Hearing this, Aikido is even more shocked. Then the girl reveals that there is another child who received training at the facility, just like the young man. Struggling like a big baby, the blonde declares that he could do it alone. Zetsu gets irritated, pointing his finger in the boy's face and saying that he would be transferred along with another person to the new school. Therefore, he should make sure not to fight with that child. And seeing that finger pointing at his face, Aikido, even irritated, gives in. While walking through the streets of his city, the young man comments that it was strange since the school should be around there. He continues to have a headache, unable to locate himself properly on the GPS. Aikido squats down and starts mumbling, saying that he didn't need a second condemned transfer student with him. After all, he could solve everything alone. Suddenly, we see another condemned transfer student in the back until a big guy comes to bother her, asking how much she charged. The weird guy asks the young girl in front of him not to ignore him. As the crazy person he is, he inquires how much the girl charged to play with him. Seeing that no response comes from the girl's mouth, the man starts to get irritated. He grabs the girl's shoulder, beginning to shake her and questioning if she was listening to him. However, even in the face of this, the young girl remains calm, just fiddling with her phone. She then tells the bald man that she already had plans. Akihito notices this, and when he looks back, he sees that the big guy is furious, saying that he is not bald and is young. The weird guy starts saying that she couldn't be so full of herself just because she was a little cute and insists that she should do what he said. Like the crazy person he is, the man lunges at the girl to grab her by force. However, the girl doesn't give him a chance, landing a sweep kick to the guy's heel. The kick is so strong that it makes the big guy flip upside down and fall backward. He ends up falling into a nearby water fountain. Calmly, she orders the big guy to cool his head, both above and below in the water. She also comments that the idiot should take the opportunity to rinse his stinky mouth. However, seeing that scene, Akiko gets excited. The young man crouches down, claiming that he could see the girl's underwear. Seeing this, the girl tells Aikido that spying on a girl is bad. Upon hearing his name, the blonde becomes extremely confused, questioning how the girl knew that. The girl then introduces herself as Yukihime and reveals that she also had a collar on her thigh. Finally, the young girl explains that just like him, she was also a condemned transfer student. Hearing that, the blonde is extremely impressed. Yukihime approaches the boy and asks if he didn't know he would have a partner, and the young man confirms that Fuyumi had mentioned that. However, he reveals that he didn't know his partner would actually be a girl. Suddenly, Yukihime comes closer and puts something on Aikido's collar. She starts pulling him like a dog while stating that now that the introductions are over, they should go to the school they were transferred to. Now at the new school that Akiko and Yukihime would attend, the teacher introduces the two boys to the class and states that they transferred today. Quickly, the two say hello to their new classmates. Yukihime says it's a pleasure to meet all of them and introduces herself. With a cute face, the young girl also declares that she would be happy if they could all get along. This statement leaves all the boys in the class euphoric, commenting that the girl is very cute and that they love her. The teacher then informs that Yukihime and Aikido's seats are at the back. Noticing that he would have to sit next to his new classmate, the blonde gets irritated. In a flashback, we see Yukihime telling Aikido that at the school they are going to today, the boy didn't need to do anything, and he just had to be careful not to disturb her. Upon hearing this, the protagonist gets irritated, questioning the girl what her problem is and mentioning that Fuyumi told him it's not nice to disregard people. However, the young girl continues walking, ignoring him, making Aikido shout, asking her to respond. Back in the present moment, while rummaging through his backpack, the boy seems extremely irritated about having a transfer student with him. He apologizes in his head to Fuyumi, but states that he thinks he can't get along with that person. The class ends and lunchtime arrives. We see the students from that school commenting that it is very rare to transfer students there, and two of them were even more impressive. The boys were happy to meet Aikido, asking him various questions. On the other hand, the girls were doing the same with Yukihime, complimenting her and asking what cosmetics she used. One of the students then starts to take something out of her pocket and offers it to Yukihime. She then shows a box of gum with various flavors. The girl asks Yukihime to accept it as a symbol of friendship. However, the girl with pink hair seems to hesitate for a moment. Even so, she then takes one of the gum balls. The girl also offers one to Aikido, who quickly accepts. Without hesitation, the fool goes to eat it, quite happy to have received a gift. However, before the young man could ingest the candy, he is hit by a slap from Yukihime. The blow is so strong that it throws Aikido far away. Our protagonist, not understanding anything, falls to the ground, hitting his back against it. The gum he had received also falls, shattering in the process. Yukihime, after the slap, maintains a frightening expression. This leaves the students in the room surprised and confused, wondering if a fight was happening. The blonde promptly asks his classmate what the hell she was doing and laments over his candy. Yukihime shamelessly smiles, apologizing and explaining that there was an insect on his face. She then turns to her classmate saying that they had already eaten too much and would accept the candy next time, and the young girl agrees, mentioning that everyone there had that candy. Furious, the protagonist advances toward his classmate, asking what the hell she was trying to do and stating that he just wanted to eat a candy. Before the boy could continue speaking, Yukam grabs his cheeks, squeezing them. Irritated and exuding a frightening aura, she asks if they could step away for a moment. After a short period of time, we see the two on the rooftop. Yukam questions what the hell he was trying to do. Hearing his question, the blonde suddenly feels offended, claiming he was just trying to get along with the group. Yukam turns, questioning if the boy was really a Dune transfer student and if he wasn't being too naive. Upon hearing that, the blonde feels even more offended, asserting that he was very aware of things. Then the girl asks why the hell he had done that. She wanted to know why the idiot was trying to ingest illegal substances. Aikido becomes extremely confused by this, not understanding what the hell that girl was talking about. Thus, she pulls out one of those pink candies from her pocket. Because of this, the young woman explains that she was referring to that candy and then states that he really hadn't noticed. A bit startled, the blonde responds that it was obviously just a candy, since illegal substances usually look like medicine. Yukam explains that there are different types of illegal substances and people make them look like candy to lower the psychological barrier to using those substances. The blonde questions how the girl knew this, and she replies that she also used those things. That information leaves our protagonist a bit shocked. As the idiot he was, he says that the girl was a bad person. Yukam simply responds that this is why she became a Dune transfer student and that the blonde was also evil. However, the young man just replies that he was a good person. That foolishness and extreme naivety leave Yukam speechless. The girl sighs and comments that Aikido was hundreds of times more childish than she thought, which makes the boy even more irritated. He points at Yukam, saying that she talks about bad things all the time. Aikido states that he had been a Dune transfer student until now, and because of that, he helped many people. So he did meet a second Dune transfer student who is so full of herself. Upon hearing that speech, Yukam remains silent for a moment. She then suggests that they act separately since it would make the mission easier for both, and Aikido, while leaving, agrees. The boy soon opens the door to go down the stairs, slamming it furiously afterward. Yukam, in her head, asserts that now that the noisy one was gone, it was time to organize the information. She realizes that based on that student's comment that everyone has illegal substances there, it is very likely that the other students are also using them. Therefore, she needed to investigate how widespread that was in that school. Yukam also mentions that for now, she would probably grab a student and force him to reveal the source of those illegal substances. Additionally, the girl comments that alone she could solve many things because she was a Dune transfer student. However, upon opening the door to the room, the young woman seems to be in shock from something. She sees all the students, including Aikido, jumping and crawling on the floor as if they were under the influence of a substance. The students' faces were completely terrifying. They seemed out of their minds. There were even students behaving like animals. Aikido was among them, apparently under the influence of illicit substances. This leaves Yukam, who had remained calm until now, in complete shock, wondering what the hell was going on. Aikido and another classmate were pretending to be flies. The young man on his back asks the blonde who he is, and the boy simply replies that he is Aikido. Yukam grabs her partner's arm, questioning what the hell he is doing and startling the boy. Our protagonist asserts that they are acting separately, then asks Yukam not to get in his way. Irritated, the pink-haired girl questions whether the blonde had licked the candy. Confused, Aikido simply replies no, which leaves the girl even more intrigued, asking if he was doing this naturally, and he responds yes. Suddenly, the student behind Aikido apologizes for interrupting the two, wanting to say something. With a frightening expression, he asks which class the two are from. Yukam, seeing this, seems a bit irritated. Another student joins the conversation, explaining to his colleague that those guys were transfer students who arrived that day in the class. Realizing it was a misunderstanding, he changes his demeanor and welcomes the new students. The young man also welcomes them to the school's illegal substances club, Akasu. This leaves Yukam and Aikido shocked, and the blonde questions whether he was really referring to an illegal substances club. Without shame, the crazy guy replies yes, and that this was a meeting where they all use illegal substances to be happy. The boy even points to the advisor, Tamura-sensei, who was also under the influence of the substances. Yukam realizes he is right and that the entire school is a hell of illegal substances. The student presenting the club to them states that this is what everyone thought at first, and in fact, he understood her. Suddenly, the crazy guy starts crying for no apparent reason. This leaves Yukam even more confused, and Aikido asks the crying guy if he is okay, and if something happened. Wiping his tears, the crazy guy comments that illegal substances really seem scary, and he used to think so too. However, changing his personality, the young man asserts that everything is fine since, for example, even Coca-Cola was not accepted when it was launched, as everything new is scary. Suddenly, a delusional person appears, saying that the illegal substances Yakushiji gives him are the best since they help him free himself from unpleasant things. The crazy guy tries to advance towards Yukam, but is easily stopped with a kick to the head from the girl. After being hit, the boy doesn't understand anything and just faints. The girl asserts that no one frees themselves with illegal substances. You just feel that way since it's only a way to escape reality. And even if you manage to run away from your problems this way, nothing will change. For a moment, silence settles in that room. Yukihime goes straight to the point and asks where this Yakushiji was who provided those substances. The students under the influence of the drug remain silent for a moment. However, one of them gets irritated seeing that his colleague was hit. Thus, the young man calls his partners, asserting that they will kill the newcomers. The leader of the drug's students claims they will put an end to those demons who are destroying their paradise. Akihito assumes his fighting stance and asks if those guys are really going to fight, even asserting that he is strong. However, before the boy could do anything, Yukihime charges at the crazies. This leaves our protagonist extremely confused and surprised. The class advisor, who was holding a huge ruler to hit the girl, is easily knocked out with a kick to the face. The young woman doesn't stop and knocks out the 3 boys behind the advisor, all using her legs. Finally, she reaches the leader, who is holding a small knife. The young woman jumps at the boy, preparing an extremely powerful kick. With all of her strength, she strikes the boy's face, knocking him out in an instant. This even leaves Akito, who had been fighting for a while, surprised. He realizes that Yukihime is quite strong and agile. After the kick to the face, the leader of the crazies falls and starts to crawl, but Yukihime quickly approaches him. With a frightening face, she grabs the collar of the young man, asserting that he would guide them to where Yakushiji was distributing the substances. With his nose bleeding, the boy says he understands and will tell the girl, asking only that she doesn't hit him. Sometime later, we go to the school corridors. Akihito tells Yukihime that she did very well this morning, and the young girl responds that he should have had that combat training during the preparation for the schools. However, the boy seems not to know what she was talking about, but at that moment, the drugged person stops in front of a door. The boy warns that it was there, while Yukihime appears confused to recognize that place. Akihito, being the idiot he was, simply opens the door, asking if Yakushiji was there. However, a man dressed as a scientist and acting crazy claims he couldn't help but get excited about his own genius. Seeing Akihito and Yukihime standing in front of the door, he questions who the two were. Removing his mask, the scientist asks if they needed anything from him. The blonde, on the other hand, whispers to Yukihime, questioning if that guy was Yakushiji since he actually looks like a pervert. On the other hand, the girl seems to be in shock, not believing that this was real. She realizes that the illegal substances the students there were taking were being manufactured right in the school, in the science room. Our protagonist and Yukihime face that scientist in front of them. The unknown man comments that that area should be off limits to students, and once again he asks who those two exactly were. The protagonist, being the idiot he was, responds that he was Akito, a condemned transfer student. Yukihime, upon hearing that, thinks that Akito was an idiot and that you should be a bit more cautious. The scientist, on the other hand, is quite confused, not understanding what the hell a condemned transfer student was. But acting like the crazy person he was, he claims that this seems interesting. The man promptly approaches the blonde, grabbing his shoulders and saying that he could really be a genius. After that, he steps back, explaining that he was Yakushiji Tensai, and just as his name suggested, he was a genius. Akito promptly greets the guy, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. While Yukihime thinks that she didn't understand much, but at least he seemed like a harmless idiot. Yakushiji, changing the subject, asks what the two were doing there. The pink-haired girl tells Yakushiji that she heard a rumor that the boy was manufacturing illegal substances, and she wanted to know if that was true. This question seems to trigger an alarm in Yakushiji's head, causing him to freeze for a moment. Tensai then says he understood and that, in fact, the two just wanted the masterpiece made by him, a genius, and that masterpiece was Lucifer. Akihito is confused, questioning who the hell Lucifer was. The scientist extends his hand, showing one of those candies that resembled gum, claiming that this was Lucifer. The crazy man comments that his creation was very beautiful, and that if you ate it, you would also become a genius. Yukihime, seeing what the boy was holding, realizes that that candy was the same one the students ate in class. The girl then asks Yakushiji if he was the one making Lucifer, and the boy responds that yes, since he was a genius. He also points to the side where there was a table full of little packages, then asking the two to delight in it with their eyes, because those were all the beautiful medicines he had created. The young woman approaches, affirming that all those medicines were amazing, then Tensei says yes, and that if Yukihime took just one, something incredible would happen. However, before the boy could say more about it, the young girl kicks all the candies, throwing them away. Yakushiji, seeing his creation being scattered and destroyed, becomes desperate. Furious, he starts picking up all the candies that had fallen on the floor, questioning what the girl had done. The scientist becomes extremely nervous, even letting out some giggles. Akihito, on the other hand, was surprised by the whole situation. Yukihime, furious, asserts that this was not funny and asks if the blonde had any idea how many people suffered because of that guy. Tensai continues crouched, laughing to himself. The desperate man then shouts that it wasn't like he wanted to do this on purpose. Akihito's ally then asks what the boy meant by that. Tensai explains that at first he just wanted to make money, but his talent exceeded expectations, and he ended up creating a drug that gave incredible pleasure. At first he did this for the delinquents at the school. Then little by little it spread, and eventually even the teachers started looking for the drug Lucifer, which is why the rumors gradually spread. Arriving outside the school, he finally reached the underworld, and one day something happened. We see a young man pointing a deadly gun at Tensai. A bald man can be seen with two other armed guys threatening the boy. Yakushiji continues reporting that the Chinese mafia, who obtained the information, came to him with a request, and they ordered him to have Lucifer ready for them on a fixed date every month. After that clarification, a silence settles over the entire place. In tears, Yakushiji states that there was no turning back now. Yukiheim remains silent as if feeling pity for the young man. Akihito approaches him questioning whether those guys from the Chinese mafia were strong, and Tensai replies that yes, since they had weapons and there was no way to defeat them. In other words, if he couldn't prepare Lucifer well enough, he would probably be finished. The girl decides to say something and asks what the scheduled date for the delivery was. Still pale and desperate, the pharmacist responds that it was today at 7 o'clock. Upon hearing that, the girl becomes confused and even asks again, receiving the same answer. Then, looking at the clock, they see what time it was. Akihito realizes something and notices that it was already 7 o'clock. Outside the school, several trucks were arriving with various mafiosos. All of them were armed and heading to pick up their cargo.